Jerusalem awoke beneath a pale ribbon of dawn, its stone terraces still holding the cool breath of night. The city was never silent, not even in its earliest hours. Camels murmured in their pens, merchants whispered as they lifted the covers from their stalls, and the scent of fresh bread drifted through narrow streets carved by centuries of footsteps. Above it all, the palace watched like a patient sentinel, its cedar columns, imported from Tyre, catching the earliest glints of sun, as though remembering every voyage that brought them here. Solomon stood on the balcony, alone, wrapped in the quiet confidence of a man who understood both the fragility and power of the world beneath him. He did not look at Jerusalem the way other kings looked at their kingdoms. He didn't see possessions or subjects. He saw movement, patterns, a living organism nourished by thousands of invisible arteries. From his vantage point, he could watch the earliest caravan assembling at the eastern gate, Arabian horses being brushed down until their coats glowed like bronze, pack mules fitted with heavy saddlebags, traders checking the knots on ropes that would hold leather casks of wine, and jars of oil steady through the desert's merciless sway. Farther west, at the outskirts of the city, workers hauled crates toward a newly built port. It was one of the first Solomon ports, fortified harbors designed to accommodate foreign ships and protect them from desert raids. Some believed the ports existed simply for prestige. Solomon knew they were the backbone of a realm stretching far beyond its borders. A steward approached and handed him a scroll. Solomon unfurled it slowly. It was not scripture. It was a ledger, one of many he reviewed before the sun was fully risen. It recorded the arrival of cedar logs from the workshops of Tyre, timber so flawless it seemed sculpted by the sea winds themselves. It detailed a shipment of African ivory carved with geometric patterns that shimmered like moonlight on water. It mentioned a caravan expected from the south, carrying gold dust from the mines at Ophir, a land so distant and mysterious that even seasoned merchants debated where its borders truly lay. Solomon traced a line of text with his finger, absorbing the movement of wealth with the same contemplative reverence another man might reserve for prayer. He had grown accustomed to thinking of his kingdom not as a static domain, but as a web. Ships, caravans, riders, envoys. Each moved like a pulse carrying life from one end of the world to another. His throne did not sit upon gold. It sat upon circulation. There is a lesser-known account, mentioned only in crumbling papyri, that Solomon often walked the unfinished docks of his newest port alone at twilight. When workers retired for the evening, when the lanterns dimmed and the sea whispered against the stone, he would descend the steps in plain robes and study the water. Standing at the edge of the pier, he looked like a scholar lost in a dream, yet his mind worked with relentless clarity. One evening, he watched as a Phoenician vessel approached, its sails stained deep red, its hull heavy with cedar and tools forged from distant ore. The ship glided through the harbor like a creature born from salt, wind, and faith. Solomon imagined the storms it had endured, the pirates lurking in unseen straits, the negotiations held under tents lit by flickering torches. Every voyage that ended safely in his ports was a victory of foresight over chaos. The captain, a seasoned navigator with eyes pale from decades of sun glare, knelt before Solomon when he recognized him. But the king raised his hand gently, urging the man to speak freely. They walked along the dock together, the captain recounting how hostile winds had forced him to take a detour near the Egyptian coast. The route was longer, uncertain, but safe. Solomon listened intently. He understood that a kingdom relying solely on predictable paths was a kingdom one disaster away from collapse. As the captain spoke, workers began unloading the cedar. The scent filled the air, sharp, resinous, strong. Solomon touched one of the beams, imagining it transformed into pillars, ships, instruments, or weapons. Cedar was more than wood. It was legacy. It was infrastructure. It was the physical spine of his expanding world. Not far from them, a young scribe knelt on one knee, ink-stained fingers working quickly as he recorded each crate. Solomon noticed the boy's hesitation when an unmarked chest was raised from the ship's belly. The boy asked the captain what it contained. The captain whispered that it held gifts sent by a distant ruler, horsetack from nomadic tribes, obsidian blades traded from volcanic lands, and a sealed pouch rumored to contain powdered gold. The secrecy around the chest intrigued Solomon. Gifts carried messages. Messages carried opportunity. Opportunity carried risk. The boy's hand trembled slightly as he wrote. Solomon rested a hand on the boy's shoulder, offering silent reassurance. The ledger mattered as much as the cargo itself. Knowledge preserved was wealth multiplied. Later that night, when the torches flickered low and the last of the cargo was stored, Solomon walked the length of the port one final time. The moon floated above the water, turning the waves into sheets of molten silver. He could feel the weight of centuries pressing gently against his shoulders, not as a burden, but as inheritance. The prophets spoke of wisdom as a divine gift, yet he knew wisdom required labor. It required listening, watching, understanding not just what the world looked like, but how it moved. He paused at the edge of the port and looked out into the open sea. Somewhere beyond that dark horizon lay Ophir with its gold, Africa with its ivory, Arabia with its horses, Tyre with its sacred forests. His kingdom was a crossroads of empires, a meeting point of worlds. But more importantly, it was a testament to the truth he would only later articulate in his private writings. That power belonged not to those who possessed the most, but to those who could reach the farthest. The sea wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt and cedar. Solomon closed his eyes and breathed deeply, sensing in that moment the fragile, magnificent network stretching across continents to sustain Jerusalem. This was only the beginning. The desert caravans approached Jerusalem like slow-moving constellations, each carrying its own story of danger, fortune, and faith. By midday, the streets were warm, the stones luminous beneath the sun, and the gates hummed with the voices of traders speaking in accents from distant horizons. Solomon often observed these arrivals from the shadow of a colonnade, hidden from notice, letting the living fabric of commerce reveal itself to him without the filter of protocol. A caravan from the southern sands arrived first, its camels draped with embroidered cloths faded from wind and time. The caravan master, A hardened man with a voice shaped by years of shouting commands over sandstorms carried jars sealed with palm resin. Inside them was powdered gold mined from a region so remote that even seasoned travelers described it as a place where the world felt unfinished. The master bowed when he saw the king near the gate, but Solomon stepped aside, asking instead to hear the story of the journey. The man spoke of how the desert had shifted unexpectedly. A well that had sustained caravans for generations had dried into a hollow of cracked earth. A tribe once neutral had split into rival factions, each demanding passage fees from travelers. A sandstorm had forced 3 days of sheltering beneath overturned saddles, while the winds sang like angry spirits. Solomon listened without interruption, his mind absorbing each detail as if they were pieces of a larger, invisible map. When the master finished, he confessed quietly that he had nearly turned back. Too dependent on one familiar path, Solomon placed a hand on the man's shoulder with a kind of solemn understanding. He knew what it meant for a livelihood to hinge on a single corridor. He had seen kingdoms collapse for less. Later that afternoon, a second caravan arrived from the western plains, its team of handlers escorting horses whose coats shimmered as if brushed by light itself. These were the famed Arabian breeds known for their speed, endurance, and intelligence. The merchant in charge of them bowed deeply and recounted how they had traveled under cloudless skies for weeks, navigating both open plains and treacherous ravines. Solomon admired the animals, but studied their handlers even more carefully. He observed their movements, their discipline, their unspoken coordination. Trade, he believed, was built not only on goods, but on the character of those who carried them. A scribe approached with a fresh ledger, documenting every saddle, bridle, and grain ration. Solomon glanced over the scribe's shoulder and noticed a pattern many would have missed. The influx of horses from the western plains had increased over the last season, while the northern breeders had slowed their supply. That imbalance could shift power dynamics within a year. Without saying a word, Solomon made a mental note to strengthen diplomatic ties with northern territories and send envoys to investigate why their exports had waned. As evening approached, a group of traders from the African coast entered the gates carrying tusks carved with astonishing geometry. Each piece held the weight of craftsmanship passed through generations. One tusk depicted the hunt of a mythical beast. Another bore the likeness of a river god whose eyes were carved so deeply they seemed to hold water. These traders were weary from sea voyages, seeking rest and fair exchange. Solomon asked them how the sea wains had behaved that season. They spoke of unpredictable currents near the southern reefs, of storms rising earlier than expected, of shifts in migration patterns that seasoned sailors found troubling. To others, these were disconnected anecdotes. To Solomon, they were signals. When night fell, lanterns flickered across the streets as people crowded into the lower markets. This was where Solomon often disguised himself most convincingly. Wrapped in a coarse outer robe and a simple headcloth, he blended with the common men, becoming a silent witness to the economy he had built. No throne, no crown, only the soft crunch of sand beneath his sandals and the voices of merchants arguing passionately over price. He stopped at a narrow stall where a young man sold small jars of resin and incense. The merchant looked anxious, his eyes darting often toward the road. Solomon asked him why. The young man explained that all his goods came from a single supplier in the southern desert. If that caravan failed to arrive, his business would collapse. He had grown dependent on one man, one route, one fragile connection. Solomon thanked him gently and moved on. But the moment pierced him deeper than any diplomatic report. A kingdom was strongest when even its smallest trades were resilient. Weakness at the lowest rung eventually echoed at the highest. Farther down the alley, a woman selling woven cloth told the king, unaware of his identity, that her dyes had grown more difficult to obtain because pirates had begun harassing ships along a known strait. Her voice carried equal parts fear and frustration. She said she prayed each night for the sea to return to its old rhythm. Solomon smiled softly, knowing that seas rarely obeyed prayers, but almost always obeyed patterns. What he witnessed in these humble stalls revealed more truth than any meeting with nobles. Prosperity was never a palace phenomenon. It lived in the hands of those who carried goods, negotiated by lantern light, and prayed for safe passage through unpredictable terrain. And it was here, amid the aroma of spices and the murmur of a restless crowd, that Solomon began to see the full picture of his global network. His kingdom was fed by gold from a hidden realm across the sea, by cedar carried from the workshops of the great maritime masters, by horses bred in windswept plains, by ivory shaped by coastal artisans. Each trade route was a thread woven into the same tapestry. Each thread was precious. Each thread was vulnerable. As he walked back toward the palace under a canopy of stars, Solomon felt both pride and inquietude. The network he built was magnificent, but he could sense the cracks that would one day appear if the kingdom trusted too few channels. The world was changing. Winds shifted. Tribes fought. Seas rebelled. And fortunes built on a single path, no matter how glorious, were always temporary. This truth lingered in his thoughts like a faint shadow behind torchlight. It waited for resolution. It waited for wisdom. Night settled over Jerusalem like a velvet curtain, soft and heavy, carrying with it the stillness that allowed thought to rise without interruption. Solomon sat alone in a quiet chamber overlooking the lower courtyards, where the last torches flickered in the hands of drowsy guards. Before him lay the ledgers collected throughout the day, pages filled with notes on caravans that survived storms, traders shaken by narrow escapes, merchants who feared the loss of a single supplier, sailors who spoke of shifting winds, and artisans whose livelihoods depended on one fragile thread. He read slowly, letting each line breathe inside him. Patterns emerged. Not the patterns scribes attempted to draw with ink and quills, but deeper ones, the kind that revealed themselves only when a man allowed silence to settle around him like a second skin. He saw the truth that had been whispering to him since dawn, when he watched ships approach the new port, and again in the marketplace, when he spoke with merchants unaware of their king's presence. Every story shared the same quiet warning. Every voice echoed the same hidden fragility. Every trade route, no matter how prosperous, leaned on forces beyond human control. A man dependent on one merchant trembled each season. A woman dependent on one dye source prayed every night for winds she could not command. A caravan dependent on one well-feared the cruelty of drought. A kingdom dependent on one flow of wealth feared the shifting moods of distant lands. Solomon leaned back and let the breath leave his chest in a slow exhale. The insight was ancient, older than kingdoms, sand, or maps. Nature itself whispered it constantly. Rivers overflowed, dried, twisted, and vanished, yet deltas thrived because they accepted many streams. A mountain stood majestic, yet broke under a single storm, while a forest endured because no one tree bore the weight of the wind alone. He lowered his gaze to the ledger and murmured to himself, almost as if reciting a prayer not meant for mortal ears. A single river dries. A delta survives. It was not simply a metaphor. It was a law, a principle woven into the fabric of existence. The universe favored plurality, movement, branching, abundance through multiplicity. Solomon understood now why the unease in the eyes of merchants bothered him so deeply. They lived at the mercy of singularity. Their futures could collapse under a single point of failure. They survived not because they were weak, but because the world had taught them to cling tightly to one reliable source. Yet reliability was an illusion. What they needed was resilience. He traced his finger gently across the names of regions supplying his kingdom. Gold from a distant coast, cedar from the shipwright's homeland, horses from windswept plains, ivory from coastal artisans, each source powerful, each source limited. If anyone faltered, the kingdom would feel the sting. If two faltered, the kingdom would bend. And if three faltered, the kingdom would bleed. The torch beside him flickered. It cast shadows across the ledger, shadows that danced in branching streams. He followed those shadows with his eyes and saw the future he needed to build. A kingdom supported not by one route, but by many. Not by one alliance, but by a constellation of them. Not by one industry, but by a wide tapestry of trades, relationships, and flows. He closed the ledger softly, his hand steady, his mind sharp as the edge of a whetted blade. The spiritual law had crystallized beautifully. Wealth must not flow like a narrow river. It must branch, spread, and ripple outward. When the world turned unpredictable, and it always did, only those who widened their channels endured with dignity. Slowly, he allowed this spiritual truth to shape itself into practical understanding. It would guide merchants, rulers, and common men alike if he dared to articulate it clearly, though he preferred demonstration over proclamation. Still, the financial meaning was unmistakable. A man must not build his future on a single income any more than a ship should trust one harbor. Streams of livelihood must flow from many directions, each supporting the others. Spices, timber, grain, wool, metalwork. Jerusalem must encourage all, never allowing itself to be chained to one treasure. He recalled the frightened merchant who depended on a single caravan, and he imagined how different the man's life might be if he sold other goods, partnered with other traders, or explored new regions. Likewise, the woman worried about pirates would no longer tremble if her fabrics came from more than one shore. Even the kingdom's relationship with the northern seafarers, as vast and fruitful as it was, should not exist in solitude. Other alliances must be cultivated. The world was too large, too unpredictable, to lean on a single shoulder. Solomon felt clarity settle over him like a mantle placed upon his shoulders. Diversification was not merely a strategy of trade. It was a way of existing in harmony with the world's shifting nature. Wealth expanded for those who allowed themselves to touch multiple horizons. Wealth fractured for those who chained themselves to only one. He imagined how merchants of later generations might speak of this principle. They might call it risk management, hedging, or portfolio resilience. But Solomon would always understand it in its original form, a law of the soul as much as a law of commerce. When a person placed their entire hope on one source of income, one business, one connection, one market, one land, they surrendered their freedom to the mood of the world. Yet, if their streams of abundance flowed from different places, city, sea, desert, craft, alliance, they created a fortress nothing could starve. He thought of his alliance with the great seafaring kingdom to the north. It was not simply a friendship. It was a joint venture of trust, where ships, knowledge, and profits traveled both ways. That was the kind of collaboration that strengthened empires. When two powers shared risk and shared reward, they created a structure greater than either could build alone. He rose from his seat and approached the window, watching the final lights fade in the city below. Somewhere in those streets, traders were counting coins, families were praying over their evening meals, and travelers were settling onto woven mats for a night of rest. None of them knew how precarious single paths could be, nor how profoundly their lives would change when he began reshaping Jerusalem's commerce with this new clarity. The desert had shown him the truth. The sea had confirmed it. The markets had whispered it. The universe had repeated it. A single river dries. A delta survives. And in that survival lay the blueprint of enduring wealth. Long before Solomon's ledgers reshaped the trade routes of his world, another king stood at the height of his power, a man whose wealth became a proverb and whose confidence swelled into legend. His name was Croesus, ruler of Lydia, the land where the Pactolus River shimmered with flecks of gold and where merchants whispered that its waters carried the blessings of the gods themselves. His palace rose from the plains like a monument carved out of the sun, its walls plated with metal so bright travelers shielded their eyes when approaching its gates. In the early years of his reign, Croesus walked through his treasury as though walking through a dream. The floors gleamed with polished stone, and the vaults glowed with light, reflected from countless ingots stacked with ceremonial precision. He seemed born beneath a golden omen. Every mining expedition returned with more than expected. Every trader favored his markets. Every tax brought in riches beyond calculation. Foreign rulers envied him. Poets praised him. And Croesus began to believe that fortune itself had chosen him as its vessel. But wealth, when too abundant and too easily won, begins to whisper lies into the heart of a ruler. The first lie was that prosperity must continue simply because it has begun. The second was that no force in the world could end what seemed destined to rise forever. Croesus listened to both lies with the eagerness of a man who wanted them to be true. One spring morning, the king summoned a group of envoys carrying the finest fabrics from the east and the purest gold mined along the Pactolus. The envoys laid the treasures before the oracle of Delphi, where the air hung thick with incense and prophecy. Croesus sought assurance, not wisdom. He asked whether he should attack the expanding empire in the east, led by Cyrus, a man whose ambitions were reshaping the world. He wanted the oracle to tell him what he already believed, that his wealth proved he could not lose. The oracle's answer was famously vague. If Croesus attacked, she said, he would destroy a great empire. He bowed in triumph. The words felt tailored for him, gilded with certainty. He marched home with the conviction of a man who believed himself invincible. The whispers of doubt from his advisors faded beneath the pounding of his own heartbeat. Croesus, the Golden King, had heard what he wanted, not what was spoken. His armies gathered in the fields outside Sardis, thousands of soldiers lined in glittering formations. Merchants filled the city's markets with anticipation of victory. Citizens imagined celebrations that would rival the festivals of the gods. Croesus ordered lavish supplies, convinced the campaign would be brief. He believed the oracle had guaranteed fate itself would bend to his will. But the world does not reward unquestioning confidence. Cyrus met him in battle not as an upstart, but as a strategist whose patience matched his ambition. Croesus expected quick triumph. Instead, he found himself facing a military force that moved with the precision of a desert storm. The first battle was indecisive. Croesus retreated, certain he would regroup with ease. He imagined his wealth would buy loyalty, weapons, and endless reinforcements. But winter came faster than messengers returned. Cyrus pursued him with a speed Croesus had not anticipated. The Lydian king fell back to the capital, expecting the walls of Sardis to shield him like they had shielded kings before. Yet walls could defend bodies, not illusions. One night, when the winter moon hung like a dull blade over the city, an elite unit from Cyrus's army scaled a section of the fortress the Lydians believed too steep to be climbed. A single, overlooked weakness, a small assumption, a narrow belief that no enemy would dare attempt the impossible. These were enough to crack an empire. The gates of Sardis opened before dawn. The city fell in less than a day. And Croesus, once the richest man alive, knelt in ashes as Cyrus approached him. It was only then that he understood the meaning of the oracle's words. He had indeed destroyed a great empire, his own. Legends say Cyrus spared him, not out of mercy alone, but because the fall of such a wealthy man was a lesson in itself. Croesus, chained yet alive, became a living monument to the dangers of faith placed in fortune rather than foresight. The Pactolus continued to shimmer with gold, but the man who believed himself favored by destiny learned that destiny favors no one, not even kings who walk through halls paved with wealth. This is where the myth ends, but the meaning waits quietly behind it. The seeds of the philosophy and the financial truth lie beneath the ashes of Sardis. In the weeks following the fall of Sardis, The once proud city became a hushed landscape of smoke-stained walls and broken gates. The golden banners of Lydia, once bright enough to blind approaching travelers, now hung tattered and motionless. Markets that had once overflowed with traders from across the Near East lay silent, their stalls abandoned in haste. The Pactolus River, still carrying its glints of gold dust, flowed indifferently past a kingdom that had forgotten how quickly fortune shifts. Croesus, now a captive, was escorted through the ruins under careful watch. He walked not as the man whose name once meant unimaginable wealth, but as someone forced to witness the fragility of the world he believed immutable. Citizens turned their faces away, unable to reconcile their memories of him with the figure who now moved like a shadow along the streets that once vibrated with prosperity. Cyrus, curious by nature and shrewd by training, ordered Croesus to be brought before him, not to mock him, but to understand him. For Cyrus knew that learning from a fallen ruler was as valuable as gold mined from the deepest veins. When Croesus stood before him, Cyrus did not see a man broken by defeat. He saw a mind that had been powerful, capable, and dangerously certain. The two rulers spoke privately in a pavilion erected just outside the conquered city. Croesus told Cyrus about the oracle's prophecy, about the golden halls, about the treasury that seemed bottomless, about the river Pactolus that blessed him with riches since childhood. He spoke with the bitter clarity of someone who realized too late that he had mistaken abundance for immortality. Cyrus listened without interrupting. He motioned for Croesus to continue, and the former king spoke of alliances he assumed to be unshakable, of nobles who had pledged loyalty but fled at the first sign of danger, of generals who hesitated when faced with an enemy who did not fear his wealth. He spoke of merchants who had promised to supply him, yet disappeared as soon as they sensed the wind turning. Every voice that once praised him vanished. Every certainty dissolved. When he finished, Croesus lowered his gaze and whispered something rarely recorded in the chronicles. I believed prosperity was a sign of favor. I believed favor could not be taken away. Cyrus, thoughtful as ever, asked him what he believed now. Croesus looked toward the river, its golden glints mocking him with their constancy, and replied that a treasury overflowing with gold is emptier than a mind overflowing with illusion. Cyrus narrowed his eyes slightly. Was it illusion, he asked, or dependency? The question struck deeper than any arrow. Croesus had depended on one river for wealth, one set of mines for treasure, one oracle for answers, one alliance for strength, one assumption for strategy. His fortune had been a towering structure built upon a single foundation. When that foundation trembled, the entire kingdom collapsed, swift and inevitable. Later that evening, Cyrus allowed Croesus to accompany him to a hill overlooking Sardis. Fires still smoldered across parts of the city, glowing like embers in a dying hearth. Croesus spoke little, but when he did, it was with the haunting sobriety of a man who finally saw the truth he had spent years ignoring. He gestured toward the city and said, "The wealth of Lydia was like a single flame. It burned bright, but alone. I mistook its brightness for safety. Cyrus replied, "A fire fed from one direction will die when the wind changes. A fire fed from many directions becomes an eternal hearth." Croesus closed his eyes. The words pierced him more deeply than defeat ever could. In the days that followed, soldiers discovered Croesus's famed treasury rooms. They uncovered chambers filled with ingots, gemstones, ceremonial armor, gold vessels, and artworks collected from kingdoms near and far. But even as the inventory grew, Cyrus noticed something telling. Everything, no matter how diverse it looked, had originated from one core source, the Pactolus and the mines connected to it. Lydia had not been a diversified empire. It had been an empire balanced on the narrowest of beams. Cyrus often said later that the downfall of Croesus taught him more than any victory. He respected the fallen king, not for his mistakes, but for the clarity those mistakes revealed. Cyrus kept Croesus alive, not out of mercy, but because he valued the lesson embodied in his life. He appointed him an advisor in later campaigns, where Croesus warned him repeatedly against trusting a single sign, a single force, a single ally, a single path. One final scene in the ancient texts describes Croesus standing beside Cyrus as the Persian ruler surveyed his growing empire. Croesus said softly, "Those who lean on one pillar will fall when it cracks. Those who lean on many can withstand the weight of the world." Cyrus nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in his companion's voice. For Croesus, the wisdom had come too late. But for those who listened, it was a torch carried out of the ashes of a fallen kingdom, a warning etched into the memory of an empire. And so, the myth ends with a man who once believed himself untouchable, standing quietly beside the ruler who conquered him, speaking not as a king, but as a witness to the dangers of mistaken certainty. The lesson waits behind the story, ready to be translated into the realm of philosophy and daily life. And its financial consequence stands silently at its side. Croesus sat alone beneath a fading sky, the last threads of dusk stretching over the hills of Lydia like a veil. The air carried a coolness that signaled the coming of night, but his heart felt strangely calm. There was no throne behind him, no treasury beneath his feet, no golden chambers waiting to echo his steps. Yet in this stripped-down silence, something finally stirred within him. A clarity he had never reached during the brightest years of his reign. He watched the Pactolus River flow, still shimmering faintly with gold fragments as though mocking the impermanence of human certainty. For decades, he believed this river was a promise. As long as it glittered, his kingdom would endure. But rivers change, minds empty, markets shift. Allies bend their loyalty toward the warmest sun. Croesus had placed his faith in a single stream of prosperity, and when it narrowed, everything around him collapsed. The spiritual truth revealed itself slowly, like a figure emerging from mist. Stability does not come from abundance. It comes from the distribution of abundance. Safety does not come from strength. It comes from the diversification of strength. The universe, Croesus understood at last, has never favored the man who clings to one source. It favors the man who learns to open many channels, each capable of sustaining him when the others run dry. He whispered the realization aloud, a confession carried only by the river's gentle murmur. A single river dries. A delta survives. These were not the words of a philosopher. They were the lived truth of a king who had seen his empire crumble after trusting the illusion of permanence. Croesus now recognized the spiritual law at the heart of his downfall. Dependency is the opposite of wisdom. To depend on one root, one blessing, one ally, one voice, one flow of wealth, is to offer your destiny to the changing moods of circumstance. When Cyrus joined him at the riverbank, he did not speak with mockery or triumph. He simply listened. The Persian ruler knew that one who has fallen honestly often sees deeper than those who have never been tested. In that moment, Croesus described the nature of his error, not as an apology, but as an insight. "I trusted the Pactolus alone," he murmured. "I mistook a blessing for a foundation. I mistook fortune for strategy." Cyrus placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, and the gesture held the quiet power of two rulers understanding something beyond conquest. Cyrus had inherited lands that would someday stretch from the Aegean Sea to the heart of Asia, yet he knew that the size of an empire meant nothing if its strength rested upon a single point. Croesus continued, more softly now. "In wealth, as in life, to rely on one is to submit to fate, but to cultivate many is to negotiate with fate." The night deepened, and small fires lit across the Persian encampment, their flickering light mirrored on the surface of the river. As the flames danced, Croesus allowed the financial meaning of his downfall to crystallize clearly for the first time. Diversification was not merely a strategy for merchants or seafarers. It was a principle deeply rooted in the architecture of survival itself. He understood that a wise person must not stake their future on a single stream of income, no matter how plentiful it appears. Livelihood must flow from multiple channels: craft, trade, land, investment, relationships, each reinforcing the others. To depend on one source is to live at the mercy of forces outside your control. To cultivate many is to build a life that bends but does not break. He thought of the merchants who invested everything in the mines, hoping gold would always flow. He thought of families who placed their fate in a single market, believing prosperity would stay loyal. He thought of rulers who trusted one alliance, one prophecy, one assumption. They were versions of him, smaller or greater, each living within a fragile structure disguised as strength. Croesus turned to Cyrus. "Teach your successors to spread their foundations wide," he said. "Across regions, across allies, across industries. Let no empire trust one corridor. Let no ruler trust one voice. Let no treasury trust one river." Cyrus nodded slowly. "Your fall has built a fortress for those who come after." For a moment, Croesus closed his eyes. It was strange, he thought. That clarity often arrives only when everything else has been stripped away. Wealth had blinded him. Loss had taught him to see. The fall of Sardis had shown him a truth he should have known from the beginning. Prosperity rooted in one direction is not prosperity. It is exposure. He imagined how future generations might interpret this wisdom. They might call it hedging. They might call it international exposure. They might call it risk management or portfolio diversification. They might teach it in academies or whisper it in marketplaces. But none of those words captured its essence. It was, at its heart, a law of nature. Every river narrows. Every fortune shifts. Every empire cracks at the point where it leans the most. But a life built like a delta, fed by many tributaries, strengthened by many flows, endures even when storms rage and seasons change. Croesus rose from the riverbank with a calm dignity. He was no longer a king, but he was no longer lost. He had become something else entirely, a warning illuminated by wisdom, a man whose failure had transmuted itself into insight. And the river beside him whispered the truth again, softly, as if in agreement. A single river dries. A delta survives. The lagoon of Venice shimmered beneath a pale morning haze, the water shifting gently in hues of silver and blue as gondoliers pushed their long oars into the depths. The city seemed to float, suspended between sea and sky, its narrow canals winding like veins through a body made of marble, salt, and ambition. Bells rang from distant towers, their echoes weaving across bridges and courtyards, awakening merchants who had spent the night dreaming of distant markets. In the early centuries of its rise, Venice was not yet a glittering empire, but a fragile cluster of islands protected by water and stubborn resolve. Its power did not come from vast armies or towering fortresses. It came from something more subtle, more strategic, an understanding that wealth flowed not through force, but through movement, information, and timing. The merchants of Venice began charting routes that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea, from Alexandria to Constantinople, each journey adding a new thread to the web they were quietly spinning across the world. Among these merchants was a man named Matteo, known across the Rialto for his uncanny ability to sense opportunity before others even smelled the scent of profit. He was not noble by birth, nor blessed with unusual fortune, but he possessed an extraordinary skill. He listened, not just to words, but to pauses, rumors, hesitations, shifts in tone, and the quiet tremors of the market that others ignored. People claimed he could predict shortages before they occurred and price surges before they were visible. His fellow merchants said Matteo had invisible maps inside his mind, maps no scholar had drawn, maps that showed not geography, but behavior. One morning, as the mist clung low to the waters, Matteo stood on the stone steps near the fish market and watched the arrival of a Byzantine ship. The crew moved with a frantic urgency, unloading crates of grain that seemed far heavier than their size suggested. Matteo approached the captain casually, offering help with the ropes. The captain, exhausted and stressed, confided without being asked that a mysterious blight had been spreading across fields in the east. Crops were failing. Grain had become more valuable than silver. There had been fights at the docks of Constantinople as citizens scrambled for dwindling supply. To any ordinary merchant, this was alarming news, something to be whispered over wine or prayed about in the dim alcoves of churches. But Matteo did not flinch. He absorbed the information the way a sailor absorbs the wind, letting it fill the sails of his mind. He knew what this meant. Scarcity had begun its quiet march. Prices would surge soon, but not yet. Most merchants had not heard the whispers. The city remained calm. The market remained stable. Matteo returned to his warehouse and began shifting his assets subtly, without drawing attention. He purchased every spare sack of grain available in Venice and its surrounding villages. Some sellers thought him foolish, wondering why a man who made his fortune from spices and silks suddenly obsessed over grain. Others suspected he intended to donate it to monasteries. None understood his true intention, not even his closest partners. Within weeks, news of the famine in Byzantium reached the Venetian Senate. Panic spread across the trading houses. Merchants scrambled to secure grain reserves, but most found only empty granaries and soaring prices. Matteo, who had quietly accumulated enough grain to feed half the city, watched the unfolding chaos with the calm of a man who had been waiting for this moment. He did not hoard to starve his people. He had no desire to become a tyrant over food. Instead, he released his reserves slowly, deliberately, ensuring that Venice would not collapse under the weight of the Eastern crisis. He sold at a fair price, enough to profit, but not enough to exploit. His name spread across the Adriatic as the man who saved the city from hunger and bankruptcy. Foreign envoys came seeking his counsel. The Doge himself invited Matteo to dine at the palace, curious about the mind that seemed to read the world as though it were written on silk parchment. When asked how he foresaw the crisis, Matteo smiled. A merchant with eyes sees cargo. A merchant with ears hears rumors. But a merchant who listens senses the world. His statement soon became a quiet mantra among Venetian traders. But Matteo's influence extended far beyond grain. He began charting subtle shifts in human behavior the way astronomers charted constellations. When ships docked with fewer spices than usual, he investigated not the cargo, but the winds. When the price of wool rose unexpectedly, he traced it to new trade restrictions placed in the north. When silk caravans arrived with frayed banners, he knew bandits had begun targeting the Silk Road again. His mind wove these signals together: weather patterns, political tensions, bandit rumors, harvest cycles, ship delays, merchant anxieties, and from them he created invisible maps. These maps predicted not where ships traveled, but where profit would drift next. Venice thrived because of men like him. Men who understood that the world did not reward the strongest or the bravest. It rewarded the most perceptive. People began saying that Venice held an empire not because of its navy, but because of its foresight. Because of men who saw storms before they formed, shortages before they spread, and opportunities before they opened. But like all myths, this one hides a deeper truth beneath its glittering surface. The true power of the Venetian world was not merely perception, it was adaptability. What Matteo understood instinctively, few could articulate. Markets are not stable. They breathe, shift, contract, and swell. Those who cling to one route perish when that route bends. Those who follow invisible maps survive. And the meaning of this myth waits in silence, ready to reveal itself in the next chapter of understanding. Twilight slid softly into the canals, painting the water a deep, burnished blue as lanterns flickered to life along the Rialto. It was during this hour, when the day exhaled its final warmth and the night gathered its secrets, that Venice revealed its true nature. The city was neither land nor sea. It was a threshold, a place where information drifted in from every direction like tides, subtle and continuous. Matteo often said that Venice did not trade goods. It traded foresight. On certain evenings, he left behind the bustle of the main markets and crossed a narrow bridge to a small tavern nestled between two leaning houses. It was there that captains, envoys, and traveling merchants gathered to exchange fragments of stories they didn't yet realize were valuable. Matteo sat quietly at a corner table, listening beneath the hum of conversation. One night, a Genoese sailor spoke drunkenly of how the Mongols in the east had begun securing more territory along caravan roads. Another mentioned that pirates near Cyprus had grown unusually organized, not attacking at random, but as though following orders. A scribe traveling from Alexandria complained about new grain tariffs imposed by a minor ruler hungry for power. These were small things, scattered words carried by men who were too tired or too distracted to understand the significance of what they said. But Matteo heard a pattern forming, like an invisible current beneath the surface of the lagoon. Trade routes were shifting, not by declaration, but by pressure. Danger in one region would push caravans to another. Changes in taxation would divert ships to friendlier ports. A rise in piracy would thin traffic along certain straits. Most merchants recognized these events only after the consequences reached their ledgers. Matteo saw them before they converged. He stepped outside into the night air, and the city opened before him with its labyrinth of alleys, boats docking against wooden posts, and distant laughter echoing across water. The soft splash of oars mixed with the scent of seawater and spices. Matteo sensed that Venice itself was whispering to him, urging him to map the world not in distance, but in movement. Days later, he received word that a caravan returning from the east arrived with less silk than usual. The merchant in charge grumbled about delays caused by new fortifications being built along the route, though he hadn't paid much attention to them. Matteo did. Those fortifications meant control. Control meant taxation. Taxation meant rising prices. And rising prices meant opportunity for those who adjusted early. But he began repositioning his capital not in goods, but in influence. He approached younger merchants with promises of partnership, offering to share knowledge in exchange for a portion of their ventures. Many accepted, seeing Matteo's reputation as a shield against uncertainty. Through these alliances, he gained insights into new markets before they became fashionable. It was said that Matteo could smell profit long before other merchants even sensed change in the air. But his most transformative insight came unexpectedly, during a storm that lashed Venice with violent winds. Matteo stood beneath an archway, watching waves crash against the wooden pylons supporting the city. The storm seemed to rip at Venice with claws of water and wind, yet the city did not sink. It swayed. It shifted. It absorbed the force like a living thing conditioned by centuries of hardship. And in those violent moments, Matteo understood why Venice endured. It was not because of its wealth, it was because of its structure. Its foundations were not one colossal pillar, but thousands of wooden stakes driven deep into the marshy ground, flexible, numerous, and resilient. A city built on many supports survived storms that would shatter cities built on stone alone. The realization changed Matteo forever. He studied how certain Venetian families spread their influence across pepper trade, wool, glassmaking, diplomacy, and shipbuilding, never leaning too heavily on one venture. He noticed how the greatest merchants always had stakes in multiple fleets across different seas. How the most respected ship captains held maps for not one route, but 5. How the wisest artisans apprenticed their children in different crafts, so no family talent died with a single misfortune. The invisible map Matteo carried in his mind grew more complex. It was no longer a map of geography or rumor. It was a map of resilience. One season, when conflict erupted near the Black Sea, half of Venice panicked. Ships could not pass safely, and prices for certain goods surged wildly. Merchants who depended on that single route suffered. A few went bankrupt. Others begged the Senate for protection. Matteo, however, had already shifted his interests to Alexandria and Tunis, anticipating that trade would reroute to safer waters. While others scrambled, he thrived, not due to luck, but because he never treated a single channel as permanent. People began calling him the man who could not drown, for no storm ever seemed to pull him under. But Matteo never saw himself as invulnerable. As he watched ships sail at dawn, their sails catching the soft light like wings, he whispered a truth only a handful in Venice understood. Only the rigid sink. Only the narrow break. Venice's rise was not magic. It was adaptation. It was the art of shifting before the world demanded it. It was the wisdom of many channels flowing into one city, each capable of supporting the others. The myth of Venetian merchants is beautiful, but its meaning extends far beyond its marble bridges and gilded markets. The true lesson, the one Matteo carried quietly through his life, waits beneath the surface like a secret tide, ready to reveal itself in philosophy and praxis. Long after the markets quieted and the last gondola slipped through the canals like a dark blade etching the water, Matteo often stood alone on the Rialto Bridge. Below him, the lagoon glimmered with the reflections of moonlit windows and fluttering lanterns. The city had settled into its nocturnal hum, a mixture of water against stone and distant murmurs drifting from taverns hidden in the maze of alleys. But the stillness carried something else as well, something Matteo understood more clearly than most. The rhythm of a world in motion. Venice lived because it moved. It endured because it adapted. It rose because it refused to depend on a single path. And so, beneath the arches, Matteo allowed the philosophy that guided his life to unfold within him like a tide returning to its shore. Every merchant who failed did so for the same reason. They anchored themselves too tightly to one route, one product, one alliance, one expectation. When that single anchor snapped, they sank quickly, dragged under by their own rigidity. But the merchants who survived the storms, famine, war, tariffs, piracy, political upheaval, were those who, like Venice itself, spread their weight across countless foundations. Matteo realized that this was not merely a rule of commerce. It was a law of existence, a truth woven through the canals, the seas, the deserts, and the markets of the world. A single road, he murmured softly, watching the ripples beneath him, is always a risk disguised as simplicity. In his mind, the faces of the men who failed drifted by him like shadows in the water. A pepper merchant who invested everything in a single fleet that never returned. A wool trader whose prosperity collapsed when a northern kingdom imposed sudden tariffs. A glassmaker who refused to diversify beyond one foreign patron and found himself destitute when that patron died. These were not victims of misfortune alone. They were victims of a narrow design. Matteo had once believed intelligence was the key to wealth. Later, he believed timing was the secret. But standing on the Rialto that night, he understood the deeper truth. The universe does not reward the clever or the lucky. It rewards the adaptive. The world Matteo studied was never static. Prices rose and fell like tides. Empires expanded and dissolved. Seas shifted their moods. Caravans rerouted. People changed their loyalties. No force in creation remained still. Wealth lived inside these movements, and so did danger. Rigid men were destroyed by change. Flexible men were carried by it. As he leaned over the stone railing, Matteo began translating this philosophy into the practical realm, a habit he performed almost unconsciously. The principles were simple, though few lived by them. A merchant must not depend on a single cash flow stream. A fortune locked into one industry is a fortune awaiting disruption. A fleet sailing only one sea is a fleet at the mercy of one storm. A mind that trusts only one form of opportunity will be blind when new ones appear. Matteo practiced what he understood. His own wealth flowed like a network of canals, pepper from the east, wool from the north, grain when famine threatened, glassware during seasons of prosperity, joint ventures with foreign captains, shares in Venetian shipyards, and rights to cargo stored in Alexandrian warehouses. Each stream reinforced the others. Each offered protection. If one dried, others swelled. His alliances were equally diverse. He partnered not only with wealthy men, but with sailors, scribes, artisans, captains, and scholars. In moments of crisis, these connections formed a web that caught him gently, while others fell through the gaps of their own isolation. Joint ventures, agreements that shared both risk and reward, became the backbone of his expanding influence. Matteo believed that a man must not merely diversify his money, but diversify his geography, his knowledge, his relationships, and even his expectations. The Venetians who thrived were those who could absorb the shifting winds without clinging to pride or habit. He looked again at the water passing beneath the bridge. Venice stood on thousands of wooden stakes, each distinct yet working together to hold the city above the tide. If one rotted, the others bore the weight. If two cracked, the structure endured. This was not accident. This was design. This was resilience in its purest form. Modern wealth, Matteo believed, must follow the same architecture. A portfolio should resemble Venice, not a single marble column, but a forest of supporting beams. Income should flow from different directions. Capital should be placed across lands, sectors, and seasons. Risk should be balanced, so no single failure could break the structure. A man with one source of income is chained. A man with three is cautious. A man with many is sovereign. Matteo imagined future generations reading his ledgers, mistaking them for mere records of trade. But he knew they contained something deeper, a map of how to live in harmony with a world that never stops shifting. The canals below whispered softly as the tide pulled. They seemed to echo the truth rising within him. Wealth is not the accumulation of coin. Wealth is the architecture of freedom. Freedom belongs to those who widen their channels. And widening the channels begins with refusing to depend on one. Matteo closed his eyes, and in the quiet he felt the full weight of the philosophy settle. Not heavy like a burden, but solid like a foundation. It was a simple truth, yet one he carried like a compass. A man with one road may walk it quickly. A man with many roads will walk them all wisely. And just as Venice survived by being a delta in the sea, so too would any life built with multiplicity endure what others could not. Dawn touched the harbor of Alexandria with a pale gold that shimmered across the sea like a breath of living light. Ships of every shape drifted toward the docks, sleek Greek triremes, broad Egyptian barges, slender Phoenician vessels, each carrying travelers who spoke different languages but shared the same awe. They came to behold the crown jewel of the ancient world, the great library. From a distance, it rose like a monument carved from divine thought. Its columns gleamed white against the sky, its wide staircases bustling with scholars draped in linen, and its entrance guarded by statues of gods whose stone eyes seemed to judge whether a visitor was worthy of knowledge. Inside, the air was cool, scented faintly with papyrus and ink, the weight of a million ideas resting in quiet hibernation. Among the countless scholars who wandered those halls was a man named Demetrios, a collector of knowledge who devoted his life to gathering forgotten fragments from distant lands. He had traveled from the banks of the Indus River, where monks whispered secrets of numbers, to the rugged coastline of Iberia, where navigators taught the art of reading winds like lines of scripture. Every journey brought him closer to an understanding he could not yet articulate. Wisdom was the greatest form of wealth, and ignorance the costliest form of poverty. One morning, Demetrios stood in the Hall of Maps, a massive chamber where the walls displayed charts of lands known and unknown. Some maps showed coastlines clearly traced, others contained vague outlines with question marks and notes left by sailors who had glimpsed distant horizons only in dreams. The hall hummed quietly as scholars traced paths with their fingers, debating the accuracy of routes that stretched into lands beyond the reach of daylight. Demetrios approached a particularly ancient map covered in specks of dust. Its edges were frayed, but the ink lines still pulsed with mystery. It depicted a chain of islands far beyond the Pillars of Hercules, places no sailor claimed to have visited, but many believed existed. He studied the curves of the coastline, the artistic flourishes marking unknown terrain, and felt that thrill of encountering a secret that had been asleep for centuries. But what captivated him most was not the map itself, but the small inscription beneath it. A simple line written by a long-dead geographer. The world hides nothing. It merely asks if we are willing to see. These words echoed in Demetrios's mind as he moved deeper into the library. He passed the Hall of Astronomy, where scholars charted stars that guided ships across seas. He walked through the Hall of Medicine, where healers studied scrolls describing herbs able to cure fevers no priest could banish. He entered the Hall of Machines, where inventors debated how gears and levers could lift stones heavier than armies. Everywhere he went, he encountered the same truth. The library was not just a building. It was a vast, living collection of solutions. Yet amid all this brilliance, Demetrios sensed a danger brewing, one no scholar wished to acknowledge. Outside the library, beyond its marble columns and scented chambers, the world was shifting. Political tensions simmered. Rulers who feared knowledge whispered that the library gave Alexandria too much power. Generals spoke of war. And in dark corridors of the palace, there were murmurs that knowledge, if allowed to flow freely, could undermine authority. Demetrios walked to a balcony overlooking the city and saw that Alexandria, for all its beauty, was fragile. Its wealth flowed not from mines or caravans, but from the written word. And words, unlike gold, could be burned. It was a truth that made him uneasy. He returned to the library's main hall at sunset. The tall windows caught the last light of day, casting golden beams across thousands of scrolls stacked meticulously by scribes. The sight always filled him with wonder, but tonight it stirred something else, a quiet dread. He imagined what would happen if fire reached these shelves, if war marched through these halls, if the wisdom gathered here, mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, medicine, poetry, histories, were erased in a single catastrophic moment. The thought stopped his breath. Knowledge was powerful, yes, but knowledge was vulnerable. Demetrios stumbled upon a small room at the far end of the library, a storage chamber rarely visited by scholars. Inside were scrolls that had not yet been catalogued, many brought from expeditions made by the Ptolemies. One scroll in particular drew his attention. Its seal was broken, its papyrus brittle. When he unrolled it carefully, he found notes detailing the trade routes of ancient sailors, routes so efficient they seemed almost prophetic. It described winds that blew in predictable cycles, currents that shifted every season, and ports that served as hidden hubs of commerce. It was a map, not of land, but of movement. A blueprint for navigating the world with precision. Demetrios realized that every empire, every merchant, every ruler who underestimated the importance of this knowledge would one day suffer. For knowledge was not just power. It was direction. To lose it was to wander blind. He held the scroll closer to the lantern flame, feeling the weight of centuries pressing against his fingertips. He knew that the treasury of Alexandria was not its gold. It was this: the wisdom to understand how the world worked, why fortunes rose, and why they fell. The tragedy was coming. He could feel it like a storm building across the sea, and the price of lost wisdom would be greater than any kingdom could afford. Night in Alexandria arrived like spilled ink, thick, dark, and quietly consuming the edges of the city. Lamps flickered along the great causeway, illuminating statues of gods who seemed to watch the harbor with stone vigilance. Inside the library, however, night did not bring silence. Scholars worked long after sunset, their voices murmuring softly beneath arched ceilings as they debated theories and translated manuscripts brought from distant lands. Demetrios often lingered among them, walking the narrow aisles between towering shelves as though wandering a sacred labyrinth. But in recent months, an uneasy shift had settled over the library. Soldiers had begun appearing at the gates more frequently. Courtiers whispered of rival kingdoms plotting to weaken Alexandria's influence. And rumors, half-truth, half-smoke, floated through the scholarly halls like restless spirits. One evening, as Demetrios studied a series of astronomical charts in the Hall of Spheres, he noticed a tense conversation unfolding near the entrance. Two scribes stood whispering urgently, glancing over their shoulders as if fearing the shadows themselves. When he approached, their voices fell silent, but the fear in their eyes revealed more than their words ever could. He overheard enough to understand. A Roman delegation had arrived that morning. Not diplomats, not scholars, soldiers, and they had demanded to see the restricted archives. Demetrios felt a chill slide down his spine. The restricted archives contained texts too politically sensitive or too dangerous to circulate freely, treatises on statecraft, ancient formulas for siege engines, navigational secrets that could shift the balance of maritime power. The Ptolemies guarded these works carefully. If they fell into the wrong hands, Alexandria's intellectual empire could become its downfall. He hurried to the atrium where scholars gathered around a table illuminated by an oil lamp. The elders spoke quietly, their voices threaded with worry. Rome's hunger for expansion had grown insatiable. Knowledge, to them, was not something to preserve. It was something to use. And if Rome believed the library held information that could secure control over the seas or the desert trade routes, they would not hesitate to take it. Demetrios spent the following days watching the tension thicken, like smoke trapped beneath the library's high ceilings. Soldiers stationed themselves at the entrances. Scrolls were moved to hidden alcoves. Some scholars smuggled irreplaceable manuscripts into private homes. Others argued that the library stood under divine protection, that no force would dare lay a hand upon such a sacred sanctuary. But Demetrios knew history too well. No empire feared knowledge. Empires feared what knowledge could empower. One morning, while walking through a dim corridor lined with busts of philosophers, Demetrios encountered a young librarian named Helenos who carried an armful of scrolls toward an underground chamber. His pace was hurried, but Demetrios stopped him gently, with a hand on his shoulder. "What are you doing?" he asked. Helenos hesitated, then whispered, "The elders fear confiscation. These scrolls contain naval treaties from the east. If Rome seizes them, they will choke the Mediterranean in their fist." Demetrios nodded slowly. The library had become not just a repository of wisdom, but a battlefield of ideas. Every scroll, hidden or stolen, was a form of resistance. Every manuscript protected was a small victory against ignorance disguised as power. By evening, the tension had grown so thick that every whisper felt like a warning. Scholars walked quickly, avoiding the gaze of soldiers now patrolling the colonnades. The usual hum of debate was replaced with the brittle edge of fear. Demetrios returned to the Hall of Maps, seeking solace among the ancient charts. But as he ran his fingers across the world's fragile outlines, he felt only dread. The lines were delicate, ink on papyrus, easily smudged, easily torn. The knowledge encoded within them had taken generations to collect. One careless spark, one act of malice, one moment of violence could erase entire centuries of effort. He recalled the inscription carved beneath the map he had studied days earlier. "The world hides nothing. It merely asks if we are willing to see." And suddenly, he understood the darker meaning. The world shows everything, but only once. At dusk, the skies over Alexandria turned a deep, bruised purple. The wind shifted, blowing toward the city from the harbor with an urgency that seemed unnatural. Demetrios stepped onto the balcony overlooking the streets and saw clusters of people gathering, torches raised, their voices tight with fear. Rumors had spread that a riot near the docks had escalated. A Roman soldier had struck an Alexandrian merchant. Retaliation had followed. The tension snapped like a bowstring. Smoke rose faintly in the distance. A single spark, a single moment, a single accident, or intention was enough. The library's fate moved closer by the hour. Demetrios rushed back inside, searching for fellow scholars, urging them to move the most precious scrolls deeper into the archive vaults. His heart pounded with the raw knowledge that they could lose everything. Not wealth and gold. Those mattered little. What stood in danger was far greater. Mathematics that charted the stars. Medicines that saved lives. Histories that defined civilizations. Maps that guided empires. Ideas that altered the shape of the world. As flames began flickering on the horizon, a terrible truth settled over Demetrios. Knowledge is the most powerful treasure in the world. And because of that, it is the most vulnerable. He understood then that civilizations do not fall when their armies are defeated. They fall when their wisdom is forgotten. And for the Library of Alexandria, the forgetting had already begun. Smoke still drifted over the city long after the riot subsided. It clung to the rooftops, to the harbor masts, to the marble steps of the library itself, settling like a shroud over Alexandria's restless heart. The fires had been contained before they reached the main halls, but the danger had revealed a truth too sharp to ignore. Demetrios stood amid the lingering smell of charred wood and seawater, gazing at the columns that had once represented the pinnacle of human understanding. Now they seemed fragile, magnificent, yes, but terrifyingly fragile. Inside, scribes moved with urgency, checking every chamber, every alcove, every scroll whose edges had grown brittle with age. They whispered with the hushed, trembling reverence of people who had nearly lost something irreplaceable. The atmosphere felt heavy, not because of smoke, but because of realization. For the first time, the scholars of Alexandria saw that wisdom could vanish in a night. Knowledge, once assumed eternal, could be unmade by a single spark, a single moment of violence, a single shift in power. Demetrios traced his hand along the smooth stone wall, feeling the weight of centuries beneath his palm. The library was more than structure. It was a reservoir of human experience, containing discoveries that could heal kingdoms, guide ships across violent seas, predict the cycles of harvest and famine, and teach future generations how the world had once breathed. Yet all of this treasure more valuable than any gold, stood exposed to forces that cared little for enlightenment. And from that fragile truth, a deeper understanding began to form within him. Knowledge is wealth, but unlike gold or grain, it cannot be hoarded safely in vaults. Its strength lies in its circulation, its replication, its distribution. But its vulnerability lies there as well. A library that holds the world's wisdom in a single place, no matter how grand, is a single point of failure. One fire, one army, one king's fear could silence the voices of thousands. Demetrios realized that the library's grandeur was also its weakness. It centralized knowledge so magnificently that it invited catastrophe. He looked at the scroll in his hand, a treatise on celestial winds used by ancient sailors. One copy, one fragile coil of papyrus. If this burned, the secrets within it would vanish forever. That thought shook him more deeply than the smoke-filled air. The library was the greatest gift civilization had ever built, and also its greatest risk. As he stood in the dim hall, surrounded by stacks of scrolls arranged like sleeping civilizations, Demetrios understood the spiritual law rising from the ashes of fear. Wisdom must flow through many channels, or it will die. Knowledge must be decentralized, or it will be lost. A single repository, no matter how magnificent, is still a single river, and a single river dries. A delta survives. He murmured the phrase under his breath, part lament, part revelation. He suddenly saw that the laws governing the rise of empires were the same laws governing the preservation of ideas. The universe favored diversity of roots, of thought, of storage, of relationships. It punished singularity not out of cruelty, but because the world itself was fluid, and anything rigid or concentrated was doomed to crack under pressure. In that stillness, Demetrios realized the philosophical essence hidden in the library's near destruction. An idea must never depend on one place. A life must never depend on one pillar. A civilization must never depend on one guardian. And as the smell of smoke faded from the halls, he instinctively began translating this truth into practical wisdom, the kind that applied far beyond Alexandria's walls. If a person builds their entire livelihood on one source of income, they endanger their future. If a merchant stores all his goods in one port, he risks losing everything to a single storm. If a family invests their savings in one venture, one market, one currency, they stand exposed to forces they cannot predict. If an empire relies on one ally, one philosophy, one channel of power, it becomes brittle, no matter how imposing its facade. The library's near loss became a metaphor for every kind of prosperity. To protect anything precious, ideas, money, opportunity, a person must surround it with multiple layers, multiple paths, multiple expressions. The modern equivalents were clear even then. Diversify your portfolio, diversify your income, diversify your alliances, diversify your knowledge. Spread your foundations across different lands, different industries, different strategies. Build your life like the canals of Venice, not the treasuries of Croesus. And preserve your wisdom like a scattered library, not a single grand archive. Demetrios felt a profound stillness settle within him, as though the library itself had whispered its final teaching into his soul. It was not wealth that safeguarded a kingdom, nor strength, nor brilliance. It was resilience, born only from multiplicity. As he walked out into the courtyard, the morning light breaking through the haze, he knew this truth was not confined to scrolls or scholars. It belonged to every man and woman who sought to endure the unpredictable storms of life. And it echoed the same wisdom spoken by every sage, king, and merchant who had survived history's fires. A single river dries, a delta survives, and only those who build like a delta, wide, adaptive, interconnected, can endure the flames that one day come for every empire. The winter winds of Edo carried a sharpness that sliced through even the thickest silk robes. Snowflakes drifted onto the temple roofs like scattered grains of white sand, each landing with the quiet grace of a falling feather. Lanterns glowed softly along narrow streets, illuminating the silhouettes of warriors returning from their nightly patrol. Their armor clinked faintly with each step, echoing between wooden houses that lined the district like watchful guardians. In the heart of the shogunate's compound lived a man very different from the warriors outside. His name was Kiyomasa, the treasurer, keeper of the shogun's coffers, guardian of an economic order that ran as silently and precisely as the sharpening of a blade. Though not a samurai by birth, he lived by the samurai code, his discipline sharper than steel, his mind trained on balance the way a swordsman trained on form. The treasury was not a grand hall of gold. It was a maze of ledgers, parchment maps, sealed boxes, and shelves stacked with rice account books thicker than any sword manual. The economy of Edo was built not on coins alone, but on rice stipends, land assessments, labor rotations, merchant guild agreements, and the intricate dance of alliances between daimyo. To the untrained eye, it was chaos. To Kiyomasa, it was a battlefield. Each morning, he knelt before a long scroll table, lighting a single stick of incense that burned slowly in the cold air. He recorded the shogunate's stores with a precision that bordered on reverence. Grain reserves, silk supplies, iron shipments, tax rice, merchant loans, debt obligations, all flowed beneath his hands like rivers converging. But what set him apart was not his accuracy. It was his ability to sense where the flow would fail before the first sign appeared. One snowy morning, Kiyomasa was summoned to meet a daimyo whose region controlled a crucial grain route. The Lord, a stern figure with eyes that seemed carved from obsidian, boasted of record harvests, swelling storehouses, and merchants flocking to his lands. His voice carried pride, the dangerous kind. Kiyomasa bowed respectfully, but he noticed something others missed. The calluses on the daimyo's thumb had changed, thicker and uneven, a sign that he had been gripping his writing brush too tightly, a sign of strain. It told Kiyomasa more than the Lord's words ever could. After the meeting, he traveled to the daimyo's territory disguised as a wandering monk. Snow blanketed the fields, hiding imperfections. But Kiyomasa examined the irrigation channels, the granaries, the workers' gate, the chatter among the gate guards. What he discovered chilled him more than the cold ever could. The harvest had indeed been rich, but the region relied on a single irrigation canal, one built decades ago, now eroding beneath layers of ice and neglect. If it failed, the entire land would starve. Kiyomasa returned to Edo with urgency, but the daimyo rejected his warnings. Pride had smothered prudence. The treasury continued granting stipends, unaware that the supply chain they depended on stood balanced on the edge of collapse. Weeks passed, then spring came, and with it, disaster. The Great Canal cracked in 3 places. Floodwaters swallowed the rice fields, turning them into drowning plains. Entire villages were displaced. Merchants fled the region in panic. The daimyo sent desperate pleas for aid as his once prosperous land teetered on the brink of famine. Edo trembled. A region that strong should never have fallen so quickly. Kiyomasa arrived personally with engineers, woodworkers, and grain convoys. It took 2 seasons to stabilize the land, and even longer for the daimyo's pride to soften enough for him to bow before the treasurer in gratitude. But Kiyomasa did not gloat. He never once mentioned that he had predicted the collapse. Instead, he stood at the edge of the repaired canal one evening, watching the water flow again as the setting sun burned orange through drifting mist. His presence was silent, but the weight of his thoughts was immense. He whispered quietly, "A strong blade breaks when it refuses to bend." Kiyomasa knew that the same was true of wealth and dominion. A great region depending on one canal was as vulnerable as a warrior who trained only one form, or a merchant who traded only one commodity. Dependence was fragility disguised as strength. He had learned this truth from years of watching warriors draw their swords. The great masters never relied on force alone. They relied on balance, breath, inner stillness, and adaptability. In their world, rigidity was death. Flexibility was survival. And so Kiyomasa applied the same principle to the shogunate's economy. Never let a region depend on one canal. Never let a family depend on one harvest. Never let an empire depend on one source of wealth. He saw clearly what most rulers never learned, that resilience begins as discipline, the quiet, everyday discipline of diversifying before crisis demands it. In the years that followed, Edo would face storms, droughts, merchant uprisings, and political intrigue. But the treasury, under Kiyomasa's watch, remained steady, not because of the wealth it held, but because of the structure he built, the invisible network of multiple rivers feeding a single sea. A samurai's sword could shatter, but a disciplined mind, prepared for many outcomes, could not. And beneath the snowy quiet of that winter, Kiyomasa carried a truth that would echo through generations. The economy of a nation is nothing more than the discipline of its guardians. And discipline begins with refusing to trust a single thread of fortune. The summer rains arrived early that year, drumming softly across the rooftops of Edo and filling the air with the earthy scent of wet soil and bamboo. Streaks of water ran down the shogunate walls like translucent ribbons, gathering in puddles that mirrored the storm-pregnant sky. Within the treasury compound, scribes rushed through the corridors, carrying bundles of ledgers, their robes swaying with hurried purpose. When the elements became restless, the economy often followed, and Kiyomasa felt it in his bones. Word had come from the northern provinces that a new alliance of merchant guilds had risen, led by an ambitious young broker named Shunsei. He had dazzled daimyo with promises of unprecedented profit: silk, salt, rice, iron, timber. Each guild boasted of new methods, faster routes, cheaper labor, and richer margins. The northern lords embraced the movement eagerly. Wealth arrived quickly. Caravans thickened the highways, and the guild banners flew proudly over expanding storehouses. To many, Shunsei was a genius. To Kiyomasa, he was a warning. He requested a private audience with the broker. The meeting took place in a tea house overlooking a koi pond, its surface dark and placid despite the rain. Shunsei arrived in a robe embroidered with elegant cranes, the fabric shimmering faintly with each movement. He knelt with elegance, pouring tea with the soft precision of a man accustomed to admiration. His confidence radiated like faint heat from a blade fresh from the forge. Kiyomasa studied him without speaking, observing details others might dismiss. His fingertips stained faintly with ink, the slight tension around his jaw, the subtle tremor in his left hand. These signs told him that success had come too quickly, that Shunsei was driving a machine faster than it was built to run. "Your work has impressed many daimyo," Kiyomasa said. Shunsei bowed modestly. "I only follow the opportunities the world offers us." Kiyomasa lifted his gaze. "And what do you do when the world shifts?" Shunsei smiled, a confident curve of his lips. "We adapt. The guilds under my guidance are strong. Supply is plentiful. Our roots are secure." The treasurer set down his teacup. "Secure is a word the wind does not recognize." Shunsei blinked, unprepared for the tone. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across his eyes, but he hid it quickly behind the practiced calm of a negotiator. Kiyomasa leaned closer. "You have built your network with impressive speed. But tell me, how many provinces provide your silk? How many routes carry your salt? How many families control your rice? And how many of your alliances rely on the moods of men rather than the strength of structure?" Shunsei hesitated, the first cracks appearing in his polished composure. Kiyomasa already knew the answers. Silk came from one valley, salt from a single coastal guild, rice from one dominant clan, timber from two connected families, and Shunsei's caravans. They ran almost exclusively through one vulnerable mountain pass. One blockade, one flood, one betrayal, and the whole network would collapse. The treasurer dismissed Shunsei with a bow, but in his heart he carried the weight of inevitability. When people felt invincible, collapse was no longer a matter of speculation, it was only a matter of time. Weeks later, Kiyomasa's fears materialized. A landslide buried the mountain pass Shunsei's traders relied upon. Rain hammered the northern salt fields until brine reservoirs overflowed and washed away. The valley that produced silk suffered a blight that turned mulberry leaves brittle and useless. The clan that controlled rice declared internal conflict, halting shipments. Trade froze. Panic spread. Dozens of daimyo demanded explanations. Shunsei's name, once praised in the northern courts, now spilled from tongues in anger and disappointment. Wealth that had arrived with the speed of summer thunder evaporated with the same ferocity. Shunsei sent frantic letters to Edo. He begged the treasurer to intervene, to stabilize the region, to rescue what remained of the guild system he had built. Kiyomasa responded with neither cruelty nor haste. Instead, he traveled north once again, this time with calculated purpose. He met Shunsei in a storehouse half empty, the floor covered with fallen bolts of silk, ruined by moisture. The young broker's robes were soaked, his eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. It was all working, he whispered. Everything was growing. Kiyomasa placed a hand on his shoulder. The bamboo that grows too quickly often snaps in the wind. Tears threatened to spill down Shunsei's cheeks, not from weakness, but from the crushing realization of his own blind spots. He had mistaken momentum for invulnerability. He had confused rapid growth with lasting stability. He had put all his weight on a bridge that could not bear it. Kiyomasa spent the next several weeks rebuilding the guild structure, redistributing supply chains, forming new alliances, opening alternative routes, and encouraging daimyo to invest in multiple industries rather than one. He did not blame Shunsei. Instead, he turned the collapse into a lesson carved into the bones of the northern provinces. On his final day there, he stood atop a hill overlooking the roads that led through villages and forests, the restored caravans beginning to move again like veins healing after injury. The air was warm, carrying the scent of pine and wet soil. Kiyomasa breathed deeply. Strength was not the absence of vulnerability. It was the presence of alternatives. He whispered into the wind, as if speaking to the mountains themselves. Only a foolish warrior masters one stance. To survive the shifting world, one must master many. The treasurer returned to Edo quietly, carrying with him yet another truth forged by turmoil. The economy of a nation is not built on profit alone. It is built on the discipline to strengthen many threads before any single one frays. The cicadas of late summer hummed across Edo with a steady, hypnotic rhythm. their voices weaving into the warm air like strands of invisible thread. In the treasury compound, however, silence held dominion. Kiyomasa sat alone on the polished wooden floor, a single candle flickering beside him, casting a soft amber glow across ledgers stacked neatly like disciplined soldiers awaiting inspection. The events of the past months lay heavy on his mind. Collapse, overconfidence, the fragility of even the strongest networks when built upon a narrow base. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. The lessons had crystallized into something deeper than economic guidance. They had become spiritual truth. The samurai believed that discipline was the foundation of mastery. Not strength, not speed, not even skill, but the quiet, relentless discipline that shaped a warrior long before he ever touched a blade. The more Kiyomasa lived within the rhythms of the shogunate, the more he realized that wealth followed the same law. Money did not respond to desire or ambition. It responded to structure, balance, and preparation. He thought of the fallen irrigation canal. He thought of Shunsei's flashy but fragile guild empire. He thought of the daimyo whose pride nearly starved his people. Different stories, different tragedies, but all rooted in the same flaw: dependence, rigidity, narrowness, the illusion of invincibility. Kiyomasa opened his eyes. The candle flame swayed gently, its light dancing along the edges of the room. In that humble flame, he saw the core of the philosophy he had spent a lifetime cultivating. Resilience is not a reaction. It is a design, and the universe, in its quiet wisdom, rewarded not the boldest, nor the fastest, but the most prepared. A stable nation required multiple revenue streams: tax rights, land income, merchant levies, trade duties, mineral rights, and emergency reserves. If any one of these faltered, the others bore the burden. A stable daimyo needed multiple alliances, noble families, guild agreements, warrior loyalties, and agricultural partners, so that no single betrayal could topple him. A stable merchant diversified routes, goods, ships, and storage. A stable family diversified skills. A stable mind, perhaps most of all, held more than one perspective. Kiyomasa leaned forward and unrolled a fresh sheet of parchment. On it, he began writing a private treatise, something he never intended for publication, something meant only to clarify the truths that had shaped his stewardship. The brush glided in smooth strokes as he wrote the first line. "The strongest structure is the one that refuses to stand upon a single pillar." He continued, "Just as a warrior trains many forms to survive the unpredictability of battle, a steward must cultivate many streams to withstand the unpredictability of life. Multiplicity is not ambition, it is insurance. It is humility before the unknown." The candle flickered as if nodding in agreement. He described what he had witnessed as treasurer, regions collapsing not from lack of resources, but from lack of diversification, families ruined not by misfortune, but by placing all hope in one source of prosperity, merchants crushed by one blocked road because they had never sought a second. He paused, then added, "A single stance invites defeat. A single stream invites drought. A single ally invites betrayal. A single plan invites ruin." He thought of the samurai sword masters he had watched training at dawn. They flowed from one stance to another, never locking into a single position. Their survival depended on the ability to shift as seamlessly as water. That, he realized, was the true essence of wealth, the ability to shift without breaking. He dipped his brush again and wrote, "To endure, one must become a river system, many channels feeding one purpose. Though one dries, another will flow. Though one floods, another will steady. Resilience is not the absence of risk. It is the presence of alternatives." This was not mere finance. This was spiritual architecture, the invisible scaffolding behind a life that remained upright while others toppled. Kiyomasa imagined the future, years when drought might return, when political unrest might shake the provinces, when merchants might again gamble everything on quick fortunes. The treasury he built would not collapse under those pressures, because it contained multitudes. His network spanned not one region, but many, not one industry, but several, not one alliance, but a woven tapestry that stretched across the shogunate like a net woven of countless threads. He set the brush down. In the quiet, he whispered what had become his guiding truth, the culmination of every crisis he had witnessed. Discipline is diversification. Diversification is survival. Not wealth, not glory. Survival, for without survival, nothing else mattered. This truth, simple, stubborn, and unromantic, became the beating heart of his governance. And as the candle slowly burned to its base, Kiyomasa felt the calm certainty of someone who had touched the core of reality. Wealth is not privilege. Wealth is preparedness. And preparedness is the art of building many paths before life tests any one of them. The Sahara at dawn was a kingdom of silence. The sand stretched endlessly in waves of gold and rose, shifting with the wind like the surface of a sleeping ocean. The horizon shimmered with heat even in the early hours, blurring the distance into a mirage that felt both mystical and threatening. And cutting through that vast emptiness came the caravans, long, winding lines of camels laden with cargo, their footsteps soft and steady as heartbeat. Among these caravans was the most legendary of them all, the Timbuktu Gold Route. At the height of West Africa's prosperity, when the Mali Empire thrived and scholars gathered in Sankore University like stars clustering in a dark sky, Timbuktu was more than a trading city. It was a beacon, a crossroads where gold, salt, manuscripts, spices, and knowledge converged in a whirlwind of culture. Yet beneath this beauty lay a truth few outsiders ever learned. Timbuktu survived not because of what it displayed, but because of what it hid. For in the desert, survival belonged to those who kept reserves unseen. One of Timbuktu's greatest merchants was a man named Idris al-Sahali, a trader with a reputation whispered from caravan to caravan. He traveled the Sahara not with the recklessness of youth, but with the calm, calculating discipline of someone who understood the desert better than he understood himself. Every journey he made seemed blessed. Storm winds shifted around him, bandits avoided him, and his caravans, unlike so many others swallowed by dunes, always returned. Yet Idris carried a secret, a truth known only to the oldest guides and the wisest merchants of the region. He never traveled with only what could be seen. One early morning, as the sun rose in a fiery arc over the dunes, Idris prepared for a new expedition. Camels knelt patiently as goods were strapped to their backs, blocks of salt, rolls of indigo cloth, jars of sugar, bundles of manuscripts destined for distant kingdoms. His apprentices moved with quiet efficiency, but one boy, young and inexperienced, watched with confusion as Idris set aside part of the cargo and buried it beneath the sand beside a cluster of weathered rocks. The boy approached, puzzled. "Master, why hide what we could sell? Are we not leaving?" Idris smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with a mixture of amusement and wisdom. "In the desert," he said softly, "wealth buried is often worth more than wealth carried." The boy frowned, not understanding. Idris continued, "A caravan must never reveal all it owns. Not to the dunes, not to the sky, and certainly not to men." He motioned toward the horizon. There were stories of rival caravans ambushed by bandits because they flaunted their riches. Stories of storms swallowing merchants who carried everything with them and left nothing in reserve. Stories of droughts that forced traders to choose between slaughtering their camels for water or abandoning their goods to die in the heat. Idris had survived because he understood that the desert, like fate, rewarded those who prepared for unseen danger. As the caravan set off, Idris rode at the front, dressed in flowing indigo robes that shielded him from the sun. The desert winds whipped past him, carrying grains of sand that stung the skin like tiny sparks. The silence of the Sahara was deceptive. It hid dangers that struck without warning. Midway through their journey, a sandstorm appeared on the horizon, a dark, roiling mass rising like a living wall across the sky. Experienced merchants froze at the sight. The apprentices panicked. The air thickened with electricity. Idris raised his voice, steady and commanding. "To the rocks! Shield the camels! Down! All of you!" They scrambled, forming a tight circle around the animals, crouching low as the storm slammed into them with a roar. The world disappeared in a whirl of sand and darkness. Breathing became a battle. Vision vanished entirely. The desert howled like a creature devouring everything in its path. The storm raged for hours. When it passed, the world looked unfamiliar. Dunes shifted, markers erased, trails buried. Several camels had collapsed from exhaustion. 2 apprentices sobbed quietly, believing they were doomed. But Idris remained calm. He checked the stars. He examined the direction of the remaining winds. He spoke with the guides. And then, in a moment that seemed almost supernatural, he led the weakened caravan to a distant rock formation, half buried under fresh dunes. Behind that formation, beneath the sand, Idris dug with his hands until he uncovered a sealed urn, water he had hidden months before, long before this journey, long before this storm. The apprentices gasped. The boy stared, wide-eyed. Idris simply said, "In the desert, Your survival depends on what no one sees. The water revived the camels. It revived the men. It saved the caravan. When they finally reached Timbuktu, the merchants and scholars greeted Idris with admiration. Yet the boy who had traveled with him now understood the true reason Idris was revered, not because he was lucky, not because he was wealthy, but because he prepared for what others refused to imagine. For Idris carried reserves hidden across deserts, mountains, and caravan posts. He built safety nets no storm could destroy. He survived because he never trusted a single resource, a single moment, or a single journey. And as the boy walked beside him into the bustling marketplace, he finally grasped the ancient desert law whispered among the wisest traders. The dunes devour the unprepared, but they bow before those who store their strength where no eye can see. The marketplace of Timbuktu awakened each morning like a great desert flower blooming under the sun. Vibrant fabrics unfurled in cascades of red and gold. Drums echoed between mud brick walls. Manuscript sellers chanted verses from memory, calling out lines of poetry that drifted above the crowd like music. Gold dust shimmered on the fingertips of merchants, weighing nuggets from distant mines. And the air swelled with the scents of myrrh, smoked leather, desert mint, and fresh dates. Idris al-Sahali walked these streets with the quiet authority of a man who understood the pulse of the city better than most. Traders bowed respectfully. Scholars greeted him with warmth. Caravan leaders sought his counsel before every difficult journey. But Idris carried his reputation lightly, like a robe that never quite touched his skin. The desert had humbled him too many times for pride to take root. One afternoon, he visited the Sankore University, where scholars debated astronomy, theology, medicine, and mathematics beneath the shade of towering acacia trees. A professor named Musa ibn Khalil approached Idris with a worn manuscript. Its pages contained maps of ancient trade routes, some familiar, others long forgotten. Musa pointed to a faint line drawn across the page. "This path here," he said, "was one of the earliest gold routes. But the caravans that used it vanished. No one knows why." Idris studied the map, tracing the line with his finger. "Paths do not disappear," he murmured. "They simply become dangerous." Musa sighed. "But with your skill, one could attempt it again. The gold reserves of the southern mines have diminished. Wealth shifts. Opportunities shrink." Idris offered a small, thoughtful smile. "The desert does not change its nature for any man, but it always rewards patience." He left the university with the map tucked safely beneath his robe. For years, Idris had heard whispers about the lost caravans, routes swallowed by storms, abandoned after tribal conflicts, forgotten when bandits made travel impossible. Some said they held buried fortunes. Others said they were cursed. Idris believed neither tale. He believed only in preparation. So, when a severe drought struck the northern salt mines, reducing supplies and pushing prices into dangerous territory, he made a decision that startled even his closest allies. He would attempt the forgotten route, not out of greed, but because crises demanded new pathways. and Idris never waited for the world to force him into desperation. He moved before others saw necessity. Quietly, he assembled a caravan, not large enough to draw attention, not small enough to be vulnerable. He chose camels bred for endurance, not speed, guides who knew the language of dunes by heart, apprentices who obeyed without hesitation. And as always, he buried reserves weeks in advance: water urns, salt blocks, medical herbs, tools, small caches of gold, even food sealed in clay jars. He hid them along potential failure points, anticipating storms, injuries, equipment loss, or the treachery of men. Only one guide knew the full map. This secrecy was not paranoia. It was survival. When the caravan departed Timbuktu under a red sunrise, the city murmured with curiosity. Some called Idris brave. Others called him foolish. But the desert did not care what they called him. Days passed, then weeks. The heat grew brutal, stripping moisture from the skin like invisible fire. The sand sang beneath the wind, whispering warnings. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, a harsh blue that offered no mercy. Travelers often broke under such conditions, but Idris remained steady. His mind moved ahead of every step, every hour, every expected shift in the weather. One evening, as the sun sank behind jagged dunes, a faint shape appeared on the horizon. Half-buried ruins. Idris's heart quickened. They were close, but the desert had one more test to offer. A rival merchant had been following them. His name was Bakari, known for his impulsive ambition and his jealousy of Idris's legendary stability. Bakari had learned of the forgotten route and believed Idris intended to seize hidden fortunes. He had gathered a caravan twice the size, believing strength in numbers guaranteed success. Bakari appeared in the distance with a loud procession, bright banners, shouts, drums. His men mocked Idris's small caravan as they passed. Bakari called out, "You hide your strength like a cautious fox, but the desert favors the fearless." Idris simply bowed. The desert, he knew, did not favor anyone. That night, a violent sandstorm erupted. It came without warning, sweeping across the dunes with a roar that shook the earth. Bakari's caravan scattered in panic. Banners tore. Tents ripped loose. Camels bolted. Bakari screamed orders into a wind that swallowed sound. Idris gathered his men beneath a natural rock shelter he had scouted earlier, one he had marked on the route after studying the landscape by starlight. His caravan survived the night bruised, exhausted, but intact. At dawn, when the storm finally died, Idris emerged into a landscape transformed. Dunes had shifted, landmarks erased, trails vanished, and Bakari's caravan, broken, scattered, desperate. Bakari crawled toward Idris, sand crusted across his lips, his eyes burning with humiliation and terror. Idris knelt beside him. "The desert is not impressed by noise," he said gently. "It bows only to preparation." He shared water with Bakari, water drawn from a cache Idris had buried 2 months before. The humbled merchant wept. Together, the remnants of both caravans continued toward the ancient ruins. And when they arrived, they discovered something far greater than treasure. They found an abandoned caravan station built centuries earlier. Granaries, wells, shade structures, once used by traders who understood the desert law better than any modern merchant. Hidden reserves, silent networks, invisible insurance. Idris realized that the wisdom of ancient traders mirrored his own. Prepare before need, not after. When they returned to Timbuktu, Idris became more than a merchant. He became a legend, a man who survived not because he was strong, but because he was ready. And in the great marketplace, beneath the shade of desert cloth, he told his apprentices the truth that the Sahara had carved into his soul. What you display feeds your pride. What you hide feeds your future. Long after the caravans returned and the dust of the desert washed from Idris's robes, he often stood alone on the rooftop of his home in Timbuktu. From there, he could see the city glowing with lanterns and hear faint echoes of merchants closing their stalls and scholars reciting lines of poetry in the courtyards of Sankore. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of desert flowers and distant wood smoke. It soothed the body, but the soul carried the memory of the dunes. Idris gazed toward the dark horizon, a place where the desert stretched endlessly, swallowing light and sound and certainty. The Sahara had shaped him. It had stripped away illusion. Out there, beneath the crushing sun and indifferent stars, a man was reduced to the truth of his choices. The desert did not accept excuses. It did not comfort the unprepared. It rewarded only those who respected its unpredictability. And so, from the stillness of that rooftop, a quiet philosophy crystallized inside him. A philosophy carved not from books or temples, but from survival itself. The surface is never the true story. Safety lies in what remains unseen. Strength lies in reserves no adversary can measure. A caravan that flaunts its wealth invites danger. A caravan that carries everything it owns walks toward ruin. A caravan that hides its reserves survives storms no one else anticipates. Idris closed his eyes. He remembered the sandstorm that erased trails. He remembered Bakari collapsing, defeated by his own pride. He remembered the water he dug from the earth, the same water that had saved every life in that caravan. Hidden reserves were not superstition or luck. They were foresight. They were discipline. They were the invisible walls that kept fate from entering uninvited. And the desert had shown him that this law was universal. Not a desert law, a life law. If a person relies on one source of safety, the world will test it. If a person depends entirely on visible strength, the world will undermine it. If a person exposes all they have, someone or something will eventually take aim. The world respected concealment, multiplicity, quiet strength. And so Idris began applying the lessons of the desert to the realm of commerce, teaching his apprentices the financial wisdom that had been carved into him through heat and hardship. Never travel with only what is seen, he told them. Never build with only what others admire. Never live with only the strength you show. To Idris, diversification was not a financial strategy. It was a survival instinct. A merchant's wealth must not be carried entirely on his back. Some must be hidden in land. Some must be invested in distant ventures. Some must be stored quietly in the form of grain, or manuscripts, or salt, or goodwill earned through generosity. Some must be buried metaphorically, untouched, unused, unknown to all but the owner. A portfolio, like a caravan, must have hidden compartments. A family, like a caravan, must have silent provisions. A life, like a caravan, must have untold strengths. He taught his apprentices to maintain emergency reserves, not just in money, but in knowledge. To learn multiple trades. To cultivate relationships in different guilds. To keep part of their effort invisible, even to those closest to them. Idris believed that wealth should resemble a desert oasis, deep roots beneath the sand, invisible to predators, sustained by waters no one could steal. A wise man never allowed his fortune, his plans, or his resilience to exist in only one visible form. As he stood on the rooftop, moonlight brushing the edges of the city, Idris whispered a truth older than empires. What protects you must not be what defines you. Visible success invites envy. Visible strength invites challenge. Visible wealth invites danger. But hidden reserves, they invite nothing and safeguard everything. He thought of the forgotten caravan station he had discovered, built by ancient traders who understood survival better than the kings of their time. Everything useful about that place, wells, granaries, shade shelters, was invisible to anyone passing casually across the dunes. It was proof that preparedness had existed long before his lifetime, long before any written records. Civilizations survived not because they built monuments, but because they hid their foundations deep. A nation that relied on one crop starved during drought. A kingdom that relied on one alliance perished with one betrayal. A ruler who trusted one army fell when that army turned. A merchant who trusted one trade route became a victim of the first storm. Idris had seen these truths etched into the lives of countless traders and rulers. He had walked among ruins swallowed by sand, entire cities that once gleamed with power but stored no reserves for the droughts that eventually devoured them. And so, breathing in the cool night air, Idris carried his philosophy into a single sentence, a sentence he taught to every apprentice who sought to follow him into the desert. Show the world your journey, never your reserves. The desert's wisdom was clear. Visible wealth feeds pride. Hidden wealth feeds survival. He placed a hand over his heart, feeling the quiet rhythm within him. A man, too, must keep reserves unseen. Of patience, of courage, of options, of resilience. This was the desert law he lived by. This was the desert law that saved him. This was the desert law he passed on. What the world cannot see, the world cannot break. The Rhine flowed like a sheet of cold steel beneath the morning fog, its current steady and solemn as it wound past the stone bridges of Basel. The city stirred awake with the muted grace of a place that understood precision not as a luxury, but as a way of life. Here, time itself felt disciplined. Bells from the cathedral rang with exact intervals. Merchants opened their shops with ritual punctuality. And deep within narrow streets lined with timbered houses, the most meticulous craftsmen of Europe tended to their silent art. They were the clockmakers of Basel, keepers of gears, springs, escapements, and secrets. Among them lived an old master named Lucas Dreyer, a man whose patience seemed carved from granite and whose eyes reflected the steady glow of workshop lamps burning late into the night. His hands, though wrinkled with age, moved with an almost sacred control. Every turn of his screwdriver, every alignment of a gear, every polishing stroke along the tiny brass teeth spoke of a devotion deeper than labor. Lucas did not build clocks merely to measure time. He built them to understand it. His workshop was a cathedral of components, walls hung with delicate tools, tables littered with gears no larger than seeds, shelves filled with dusty tomes describing the geometry of movement. In the corner, an intricate astrolabe spun slowly, its brass arms catching hints of sunlight through the wooden shutters. The room hummed with quiet life, as though each ticking mechanism added a heartbeat to the air. One winter morning, a young apprentice named Elias arrived to study under Lucas. He had heard the legendary tales that Lucas's clocks could keep time so accurately that even ship captains relied on them for navigation. That foreign kings waited years for a single commission. That beneath Lucas's calm demeanor hid a mind capable of predicting mechanical failures before they occurred. Elias did not know if the stories were exaggerated, but as he stepped into the workshop for the first time, he felt a stillness that made him instinctively lower his voice. Lucas greeted him with a nod, then pointed to a disassembled clock scattered across a wooden table. "Before you learn to build," Lucas said softly, "you must learn to observe." Elias studied the gears. They appeared identical, indistinguishable to the untrained eye. But Lucas placed a hand on his shoulder. "Look closely. Not everything that matters is visible at first glance." As the weeks passed, Elias trained his eyes to see what others ignored: the micro-scratches that indicated wear, the slightest deviations in tooth length, the subtle resistance in a spring about to fatigue. Lucas taught him that every mechanism had a hidden life, a silent conversation between its parts. A clock did not fail suddenly. It whispered its weakness long before collapse. Then one evening, as snow drifted gently past the workshop windows, the mayor of Basel arrived with an urgent request. A great astronomical clock in the city square, the pride of Basel, admired by travelers across Europe, had begun losing time. Only by seconds each day, but enough to alarm the city council, for the clock controlled much more than public hours. It regulated market schedules. It signaled river tolls. It synchronized merchant shipments. It maintained order in a city where precision shaped stability. Lucas bowed respectfully and agreed to investigate the problem. The next morning, he and Elias climbed the narrow spiral staircase leading to the heart of the astronomical clock. The gears towered above them, towering wheels of steel and bronze turning with the slow, majestic rhythm of celestial motion. Every part interlocked flawlessly with the next, forming a delicate machine that mirrored the movements of the heavens themselves. Elias was awestruck. "This is perfection," he whispered. Lucas touched one of the massive gears. "Perfection rarely exists," he murmured. "And when it appears to, it is usually hiding something." Hours passed as Lucas examined gear after gear, measuring tolerances with instruments so precise that Elias had never seen their equivalents. Yet nothing appeared broken, nothing jammed, nothing worn. But Lucas was patient. He watched the clock long enough to see the slightest irregularity, a delay so small it was barely perceptible. He knelt, placed his ear against a wooden beam, and listened, not to the ticking, but to the silence between ticks. Then he found it. A single supporting pin, located deep within the structure, was weakening. The wood around it had begun to soften due to unseen moisture seeping through the stone wall. The pin still held. The clock still functioned, but the foundation had begun to fail. And if it snapped, the entire mechanism, the great pride of Basel, would collapse in a cascade of destruction. Elias stared in horror. But everything looked strong. How could something so small matter? Lucas looked at him gently. "Small cracks break great machines," he said. "Time does not forgive narrow foundations." He sent word for carpenters to reinforce the beam, replace the pin, and repair the moisture seal. By the end of the week, the astronomical clock ran flawlessly once more. Basel breathed in relief, but Elias remained troubled. "How did you know?" he asked one evening as they walked home through the crisp night air. "How did you see what no one else saw?" Lucas paused beneath a flickering street lamp and answered with quiet conviction. "Because I never look at the visible alone. Everything that endures, machines, fortunes, empires, lives, rests on invisible structures. The part people do not see is the part that determines whether it breaks." He placed a hand over the apprentice's shoulder. "Never trust the surface. Strength lives in what the world overlooks." The wind swept through the streets, carrying a chill that made Elias pull his robe tighter. But inside, something warm ignited. A new understanding, a deeper respect for the quiet geometry of resilience. Lucas had shown him the truth. Time does not destroy what is weak. It exposes what was never supported. And in Basel, a city built on precision, the greatest craftsmen were not the ones who made beautiful objects. They were the ones who understood what kept them from falling apart. Winter deepened its hold on Basel, laying a quiet frost across rooftops and turning the Rhine into a darker, slower river. Lucas Dreyer's workshop glowed like a sanctuary of warmth against the biting cold. Inside, gears ticked with the delicate regularity of snowfall, each mechanism a tiny universe governed by precision. Elias worked beside his master now with growing confidence, though he knew he had barely begun to understand the subtleties of the craft. One night, just after dusk, a merchant named Johann Meissner arrived unexpectedly at the workshop. His fur cloak was dusted with powdery snow, his boots soaked from crossing the icy streets. His face, normally composed with the pride of wealth, carried an urgency that immediately unsettled Elias. "Master Lucas," Meissner began, bowing with unusual humility, "I need your help. My family's timepieces have begun failing. Not in appearance, no. They look pristine, but they lose minutes unpredictably. I have no explanation." Lucas motioned for him to sit beside the work table. "Your house clocks have served 3 generations. Why do they fail now?" Meissner hesitated before answering. "Because all our trade depends on a new line of shipments. We have invested everything, and the timing of our deliveries must align with river traffic schedules, tax windows, and customs checks. We cannot afford unpredictability." Lucas exchanged a brief glance with Elias. This was not about clocks. This was about a merchant leaning his entire fortune against one narrow pillar. But Lucas nodded with compassion. "Bring me one of the clocks," he said. "Let us see what speaks within it." The next morning, Meissner returned with a clock encased in polished walnut, adorned with carvings of grapes and vines. Elias admired the craftsmanship as Lucas opened the case. Inside, the gears glimmered with the faint sheen of expensive oil. Nothing obvious was broken, nothing rusted or misaligned. Yet Lucas frowned. He lifted one gear between his fingertips. "This alloy," he murmured, "is not Basel-made." Meissner swallowed hard. "The craftsman I hired said the metal was finer than what we use here." "Finer?" Lucas raised a brow. "Or cheaper?" Elias watched as Lucas held the gear closer to the lamp. Under the soft flame, faint irregularities revealed themselves, tiny inconsistencies invisible to anyone without experience. Lucas sighed softly. "This is the danger," he said. "Not that the clock is weak, but that its weakness is hidden." Meissner's shoulders sagged. "Can it be fixed?" "It can," Lucas said. "But your true problem lies elsewhere." He placed the gear gently back on the table. "You have tied the rhythm of your fortune to one enterprise, one schedule, one fragile chain of events. Your clocks fail because they bear the reflection of your life. Too many pressures placed upon too narrow a mechanism." Meissner paled at the implication. He looked at the clock with new fear, as though seeing his own vulnerability enclosed within its wooden frame. But Lucas was not finished. Later that afternoon, he asked Elias to accompany him to the merchant's estate. Snow crunched under their boots as they walked through the wealthy quarter. Meissner's home overlooked the river, a grand structure built on stone foundations. But Lucas studied its edges, its angles, its roofline. He examined the storage barns and the ledger rooms. He observed the faces of servants and the tension in Meissner's gait. Finally, he stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the frozen Rhine. This estate was built with care. Lucas began, his breath forming pale mist in the air. But it stands on an assumption that the river will always cooperate. Your fortune depends on a single line, the timing of shipments. One freeze, one tax increase, one accident on the bridge. and everything collapses. Meissner closed his eyes, shaken. I thought efficiency was strength. Efficiency, Lucas said gently, is strength only when paired with slack. Without slack, it becomes fragility. They returned indoors, where the warmth of the hearth softened the edges of the conversation. Lucas spoke not as a craftsman now, but as a philosopher forged by years of observing the quiet laws of time. Your clocks fail because they mirror your design. Too many demands placed on too few supports. Time may tolerate this for a moment, but never for long. That evening, after returning to the workshop, Elias asked the question that had been pressing on his mind. Master, how did you learn to see weakness where others see beauty? Lucas lifted a small brass gear between them, holding it up so the lamplight illuminated its edges. Because, he said, a life, like a clock, announces its failures long before it breaks, but only to those who listen. He placed the gear down carefully. Many people admire the ticking. Few understand the tension inside the spring, and fewer still ask whether the spring should be given more than one burden. The snowfall outside grew heavier, blanketing the streets in white silence. Elias stood by the window, watching the flakes swirl like drifting sparks. Behind him, Lucas's voice rose again, calm and steady. Remember this, Elias. Fortunes do not collapse suddenly. They collapse invisibly, through unnoticed strain. He pointed gently toward the disassembled clock. Build everything, your craft, your alliances, your wealth, with multiple supports. Never trust a single pivot, however strong. Never place your life upon one timing, however precise. Elias nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson with the gravity it deserved. In the heart of the winter night, the workshop ticked softly, each clock marking time with quiet accuracy. But beneath those gentle sounds lived an unspoken truth, the truth Lucas had carried through decades of mastery. Precision without redundancy is fragility. Timing without margin is danger. Beauty without structure is collapse waiting to happen. And in that dim workshop, surrounded by gears that moved with the discipline of the stars, Elias understood that the greatest clockmakers were not those who built masterpieces, but those who prevented masterpieces from breaking. Snow melted slowly along the gutters of Basel as winter loosened its grip, revealing stone streets darkened by passing storms. The Rhine flowed stronger now, its waters carrying hints of spring as if time itself had awakened from hibernation. In his workshop, Lucas Dreyer sat quietly beside the window, his fingers resting lightly against a pocket watch he had recently repaired. It ticked with a steady, serene rhythm, each movement a meditation on balance. Elias entered silently, carrying fresh parchment. Lucas nodded, sensing the unspoken questions lingering in the young apprentice's posture. The lessons of the past weeks, of failing gears, fragile fortunes, and warnings hidden inside delicate machines, had unsettled something within Elias. He understood the mechanics, but not yet the philosophy. Lucas turned slightly. "What troubles you?" Elias hesitated. Master, I understand how clocks break. I understand how fortunes break. But what I do not understand is why people fail to see their collapse before it happens. The old clockmaker smiled with a sadness that seemed born of long acquaintance with human nature. Because, he said softly, people trust the visible far more than they trust the invisible. He placed the pocket watch between them and tapped lightly on its outer casing. This, the gleaming surface, this is what most people protect. Their appearance, their income, their business, their success. But they ignore the interior gears, the things that matter most, the structures that hold everything together, the redundancies, the reserves, the balance. Elias listened, eyes fixed on the watch. Lucas continued, his voice deepening with certainty. When a clock loses time, the problem is never the hands. It is always the mechanism beneath. When a life loses stability, the problem is not the moment. It is always the foundation beneath. He turned the watch in his palm, letting the light catch the intricate filigree. This is the geometry of time. Nothing fails where it is visibly weak. It fails where it is invisibly strained. But the lesson did not stop there. Just as Idris learned from the desert, and Solomon learned from the sea, Lucas learned from gears. The world rewards the redundant. The world punishes the precise but fragile. He leaned back, folding his hands. You asked why people do not see collapse approaching. It is because they build their life like a clock with a single spring. Elias frowned. A single spring seems efficient. Lucas nodded. Efficiency is the first step toward catastrophe. He rose from his chair and walked toward a large wooden cabinet. Inside were dozens of unfinished timepieces, projects paused for reasons only Lucas knew. He took one in his hands, a complex mechanism with multiple springs and layered safeguards. This, he said, showing it to Elias, is resilience. If one spring weakens, another compensates. If a gear slips, a secondary gear absorbs the strain. If motion slows in one section, momentum from another keeps the clock alive. He set it down gently, just as in wealth. And now the financial wisdom emerged. Quiet, steady, and undeniable. A fortune built on one source, one income, one market, one employer, one investment, one product is a clock with a single spring. It is precise, it is efficient, and it breaks the moment life places more weight on it than it can bear. A resilient fortune, however, is a layered mechanism, a portfolio of different movement sources, real estate, long-term investments, cash reserves, diversified markets, different industries, skills that generate income, relationships that open doors, ventures that cross borders. Most people, Lucas said, protect the hands of the clock, the part the world sees. They polish it. They admire it. They build it bigger. But they forget the springs. They forget the gears. They forget to design for strain. He walked back to the window, watching the Rhine flow beneath an overcast sky. Life, he continued, is a series of unexpected waits, a sudden illness, A lost job, a broken partnership, a market collapse, a changing season. Most people break at the first unexpected wait because they built only what they hoped would be enough. He turned to Elias, eyes steady. You must build not for what you expect, but for what you cannot imagine. Silence stretched gently between them, filled only by the soft ticking of countless clocks marking the rhythm of the world. Elias spoke quietly. So wealth must run like time, on multiple gears, not a single one. Lucas smiled. Exactly. A wise man builds so that his life continues even if one gear falls away. A wise nation invests so that its prosperity endures even if one industry dies. A wise merchant creates several pathways so that a failed route becomes an inconvenience, not a ruin. He touched the pocket watch again. This is the truth hidden in every mechanism. Redundancy is not waste. Redundancy is wisdom disguised as patience. He folded his arms and added, when you diversify your income streams, you are building a clock with many springs. When you invest across different sectors, you are layering gears. When you maintain savings, relationships, and skills, you are strengthening foundations unseen. He paused, letting the meaning echo through the room. What the world calls security, Lucas said softly, is merely a clock waiting to fail. True security is not visible. It is built quietly, inside the structure. The candle flickered. The Rhine flowed in steady rhythm. And somewhere deep in the workshop, a clock chimed the hour with perfect harmony, its sound a testament to the philosophy Lucas had lived by for decades. A philosophy Elias finally understood. A philosophy that whispered, build your wealth like a clock. Conceal strength beneath the surface. Place no faith in a single spring. And honor the quiet geometry that keeps everything moving when the world grows unpredictable. The desert dawn stretched pale blue over Samarkand, the ancient city where caravan bells chimed like distant memories, and the fragrance of cinnamon mingled with the dust of the Silk Road. As the sun climbed, its first golden rays fell upon sapphire-tiled domes and minarets that glowed like lanterns guiding travelers from worlds apart. Merchants gathered in the Registan Square, their voices blending into a warm, rhythmic hum. Deals were struck with soft handshakes. Camels shifted their weight beneath mountains of cargo, and the scent of cardamom tea drifted through the morning air. In this crossroads of the world lived a merchant known as Rashid al-Khair, though most simply called him the Compass. Not because he navigated the desert better than others, but because he seemed guided by a direction no one else could see. While other traders chased quick profits, Rashid planned in spans of decades. His wealth did not spike. It unfolded, quietly, like silk unraveling beneath a patient hand. Rashid came from humble origins. His father had been an ordinary cloth seller, earning just enough to keep the family warm during the harsh Central Asian winters. But even as a boy, Rashid noticed something the adults around him ignored. Every merchant lived in the rhythm of short seasons. They traded for spring. They prepared for winter. They gambled on the next caravan's arrival. Few planned beyond a year. None planned beyond 5. But Rashid, Rashid observed cycles the way astronomers observed stars. He saw how empires rose and fell like waves, how trade routes shifted with wars and politics, how drought in a distant land rippled across prices in Samarkand a year later, how a single invention, like the stirrup or the wind compass, reshaped entire economies. He watched, he listened, he waited. And when he finally entered the merchant world, he carried a philosophy that set him apart. Do not trade for the next market. Trade for the next decade. While others boasted of fast fortune, Rashid invested in things that took years to bear fruit. He commissioned plantations in distant valleys where mulberry trees grew slowly but steadily, feeding silkworms that would yield unmatched fabric a decade later. He funded apprenticeship programs for young craftsmen whose skills would mature long after their competitors had retired. He purchased land along emerging trade routes that seemed useless in the present. Empty roads, barren junctions, forgotten villages, but blossomed into bustling centers years later as political winds shifted. Many mocked him. You plant trees you will never sit beneath. They laughed. But Rashid only smiled. The shade is not for me alone, he answered. One year, a drought struck the western half of the Silk Road. Rivers thinned, fields cracked, caravans halted. Merchants panicked as grain prices soared and supply chains collapsed. People accused the gods of anger. Others blamed distant rulers. Wealth evaporated across the region like water beneath the desert sun. But Rashid, he remained calm. Years earlier, he had studied a pattern in rainfall records, notes scribbled in old monastery ledgers, observations etched by travelers who had wandered through Samarkand long before him. The records spoke of a drought cycle returning every 20 years. Rashid had prepared accordingly. He had stored enough grain, purchased early rights to wells in the mountains, and invested in irrigation systems when water was still plentiful. When the drought came, he was ready, not to exploit, but to stabilize. He released his grain slowly, at fair prices, preventing starvation in several districts. He offered water rights to struggling merchants. Caravans passed through his warehouses like pilgrims seeking refuge. Rashid's name spread from Kashgar to Persia, from India to the distant lands of the Rus. But he remained humble, walking calmly through the bazaars with dust on his robes and patience in his steps. His apprentices called him extraordinary. He answered only, "I am ordinary. I simply plan for the years no one else sees." One evening, after the drought had finally broken and rain returned to the fields, Rashid gathered his apprentices beneath the courtyard pomegranate trees. The lamps cast warm halos of light across the stone floor as he told them the story of his first long-term investment. Not gold, not silk, not land, a single orchard. 25 years earlier, Rashid had purchased barren ground on the outskirts of Samarkand. People laughed, calling it the Field of Stones. But Rashid saw something different. The soil was rich beneath the top layer. Water channels could be redirected with patience, and pomegranate trees, once rooted, would produce fruit for generations. 25 years later, the orchard fed half the city, He looked at his apprentices and said quietly, "Most men look for treasure they can hold, but time is the greatest treasure, and time gives only to those who respect its pace." As night deepened, his apprentices remained seated, silent and transfixed. Rashid had not simply taught them commerce. He had taught them the unseen direction that guided every decision he made, the long horizon, a compass set not to the winds of the moment, but to the currents of decades. And through that compass, he shaped a fortune not built on urgency, but on patience. The next season arrived with the scent of warm winds carrying dust from distant plains. Caravans once again flowed through Samarkand's gates, their bells chiming merrily after months of drought and fear. The merchants who had nearly lost everything rushed to rebuild their fortunes, scrambling to reclaim what the desert had taken. But Rashid al-Khair did not rush. He moved with the same quiet patience that had guided him for decades. One late afternoon, as the sun painted the city in shades of amber and rose, Rashid visited the northern caravanserai, a massive courtyard where travelers rested, camels knelt beneath shaded awnings, and storytellers recited tales that spanned continents. The air was thick with the smell of dried figs, animal musk, incense, and distant storms. He walked among the newly arrived caravans, observing them not with the hunger of a trader seeking profit, but with the eyes of a man reading the long arc of history written in small details. He noted the unusually frayed saddle ropes on camels from the east, sign that their routes had been longer and more treacherous than expected. He noticed the tightness in the hands of a caravan leader counting coins, a man used to plenty now struggling with scarcity. He heard rumblings of unrest in border territories, of minor kings threatening toll increases, of new routes opening where old ones were failing. Patterns. He listened for patterns. In the corner of the courtyard, beneath a tattered awning, he found an old friend, Bakhtiar, the astrologer. A man with ink-stained fingers and eyes as sharp as desert hawks, Bakhtiar studied celestial movements as carefully as Rashid studied earthly trade. "You're early," Bakhtiar murmured, not looking up from his parchment chart. "The sky moves slowly," Rashid replied, "but the merchants are always in haste." Bakhtiar smiled. "Then we are both out of place in this world." Rashid knelt beside him. "Tell me what the stars whisper." Bakhtiar traced a slow circle around a cluster of constellations. 2 empires will shift their borders within the next 5 winters. This will open roads no one expects and close others forever. Rashid nodded, unshaken. These were the kinds of changes he lived for. Not the chaos, but the opportunities hidden within slow tectonic movements of nations and markets. While others traded for the next season, Rashid traded for the next era. In the weeks that followed, he traveled to the outskirts of Samarkand to inspect his orchard. The trees stood tall now, dark leaves glistening under the dry sun. Fruit hung swollen and red, ripening with the promise of another abundant harvest. Children chased each other between the rows, and workers sang as they collected the produce into woven baskets. Rashid walked through the orchard with a visiting merchant named Harun, who stared at the thriving land in awe. "You planted all this," Harun whispered, "before you were wealthy." Rashid smiled, touching a branch heavy with fruit. "I planted this when I had enough to survive, not enough to be comfortable." Harun frowned. "But why? You could have invested in caravans. You could have doubled your gold." Rashid shook his head gently. "Gold grows quickly and disappears quickly. Trees grow slowly and give forever." Harun exhaled, overwhelmed. "You think in years, decades. Even after drought, you remain calm. How?" Rashid pointed toward the distant horizon, where the sky curved softly into blue infinity. "When you walk toward a horizon, you do not fear each stone beneath your feet. You see the path not as steps, but as direction." Harun lowered his gaze, humbled. Rashid continued walking between the trees, his voice low and steady. "Most merchants fear loss because they live for the next shipment, the next profit, the next caravan. They live in the narrow rhythm of urgency. But urgency blinds a man to the bigger shape of time." He bent down, lifting a small sprout growing at the base of an older tree. "Look at this. This sprout will bear fruit not next year, not the year after, but many years from now. If a man lives only for this season, he will cut it down as a nuisance. But if he lives for the future, he will protect it." Harun stared at the sprout, seeing at last what Rashid saw. Not what existed, but what could exist. That evening, Rashid returned to the city. Lanterns glowed softly across the Registan Square, turning the blue-tiled facades into living jewels. He walked past a group of young merchants loudly celebrating a recent profit. They shouted about doubling their wealth in a single trade, calling themselves masters of the Silk Road. Rashid watched with a kind smile, for he had once been young, but he knew what they did not. Fast wealth is loud. Enduring wealth is silent. He reached his home, where a group of apprentices waited anxiously. One stepped forward. "Master Rashid, should we invest in the silk caravans now that prices have dropped?" Rashid unwrapped his turban and set it aside. "No. The roads will be unstable for at least 2 seasons. We invest when the winds settle, not when they scream." Another apprentice asked, "Then what should we do?" Rashid sat beside a brass lantern and poured himself tea. "For now," he said gently, "we watch the world. We plant what takes root. We wait with purpose." He raised the cup, watching the steam rise like a soft omen. "Time," he whispered, "is the fairest partner of all, if you give it patience." Outside, the voices of the young merchants still echoed through the night. But within Rashid's quiet courtyard, the air was still, calm, anchored, vast, not rushed, not desperate. A mind aligned with the horizon. And that was the quiet beginning of Rashid's greatest insight, the one that would soon shape the spiritual and financial teachings of Chapter 8. Short-term thinking builds wealth that flickers, Long-term thinking builds wealth that endures. Night arrived gently over Samarkand. The city softened under the glow of countless lanterns, their amber light shimmering like fireflies caught in a slow dance. Merchants finished closing their stalls, camels settled into sleep, and the cool desert breeze drifted through the pomegranate orchards Rashid had planted decades earlier. In his quiet courtyard, Rashid al-Khair sat with his apprentices beneath the open sky. The stars above were brilliant, vast, patient, ancient. They moved in rhythms not measured by hours or days, but by centuries. Rashid often said that if a man wished to understand time, he should look not at clocks, but at constellations. Tonight, he intended to teach the lesson he had lived his entire life. He poured tea into small clay cups, the steam curling upward like incense rising toward the heavens. The apprentices sat in a circle, hushed, expectant. Rashid looked upon them with warmth, but also with the solemnity of someone preparing to reveal a truth that required maturity to grasp. "My children," he began in a low, steady voice, "the world worships urgency. Men sprint from deal to deal as if the horizon will vanish if they walk toward it. They chase profits born overnight, forgetting that wealth made quickly often vanishes with the same speed." He raised his cup slightly. True prosperity lives on a longer scale. The apprentices exchanged glances, some intrigued, others uncertain. Rashid continued, "The drought taught you that wealth built for a single season collapses when the season changes. The orchard taught you that wealth planted slowly stands firm, even through hardship. And the caravans taught you that fortunes shaped by haste fall prey to every storm." He set the cup down gently. "This is the long horizon law. What grows slowly lasts. What compounds quietly strengthens. What is built with patience survives." He leaned forward. "When a man plans only for the next year, he lives in fear. When he plans for 5 years, he lives with pressure. But when he plans for decades, something shifts inside him." He paused, letting the silence deepen around the words. He becomes calm. He becomes strategic. He becomes free. The apprentices listened, their faces illuminated by firelight. Rashid spoke again, his tone almost whispering, "Time is not your enemy. Impatience is." He then translated this wisdom, this spiritual law, into the practical realm of wealth. In trade, as in life, everything that accelerates too quickly is unstable. Prices that double overnight crumble just as fast. Empires that expand too aggressively fall from exhaustion. And merchants who demand immediate returns walk blind into traps. He pointed toward the orchard beyond the courtyard walls. "That orchard pays us every season now. But it began as barren soil. 25 years ago, people mocked me for buying it. They could not see past the present moment. Most men cannot." He folded his hands in his lap. Long-term investing is nothing more than faith married to patience. It is the belief that the world rewards those who honor time, not chase it. He then spoke of compounding, the quiet force most merchants underestimated. When you reinvest profits, the world begins to work for you. Slowly at first, imperceptibly, but over many years, the growth becomes tidal, like a caravan beginning as a single camel and ending as an army of wealth. One of the apprentices raised a timid question. "Master, how does a man learn to think like this, to plan so far ahead?" Rashid smiled, his expression softening. "You begin by lifting your eyes. Stop measuring your life by the next transaction. Begin measuring it by the next generation. Ask yourself not, 'What will I gain this year?' but, 'What will endure after I am gone?'" The apprentices nodded slowly, and in finance, he added, "This means choosing investments that endure. Land, skill, trade routes, diversified ventures, businesses built on fundamentals, markets that expand over decades, and most of all, yourself." He tapped his chest lightly. "The most powerful compounding engine is the mind that refuses to stop learning." He looked up at the stars again. "You cannot rush the horizon, but you can walk toward it every day." Then he offered the final, distilled truth of his philosophy, the principle that guided him through droughts, wars, shifting empires, and changing markets. Short-term gains make noise. Long-term gains make empires. Rashid stood, the night wind catching his robes. "My children," he said softly, "build your wealth the way you plant orchards. Quietly, patiently, for the future. And when the storms come, and they will, your roots will hold." He bowed his head, signaling the end of the lesson. As the apprentices dispersed, the courtyard returned to stillness. Only the stars remained, silent witnesses to the truth that real prosperity belongs not to those who rush, but to those who endure. Night had grown deep around the world we constructed, around Solomon's ports and Croesus's downfall, around Venice's invisible maps and Alexandria's fragile scrolls, around samurai treasuries, desert caravans, and Basel's silent clocks. Across the chapters, each story had carried its own fragrance, its own mood, its own quiet truth. And yet, beneath every myth, one message pulsed like a hidden current. Wealth is never an accident. It is a structure, a discipline, a relationship with time. In the dim glow of the fire, where the narrator's voice softened into warmth, these truths came together like tributaries flowing into one vast river. This river remembered Solomon's wisdom, how prosperity requires more than brilliance. It requires breadth, a single port, a single ship, a single stream of fortune. Each is a promise waiting to break. But a delta, many channels flowing with intention, survives every season. It carried the echo of Croesus's warning. The illusion of invincibility blinds the wealthy more quickly than poverty blinds the poor. To place all your faith in one prophecy, one market, one source, is to lean against a pillar carved from sand. It remembered the Venetian merchants tracing invisible maps across seas and mines, patterns hidden from the frantic eye, signals that only patience could interpret. A reminder that foresight is not magic, but attention sharpened by humility. The river passed through Alexandria, where the greatest library on earth stood vulnerable because it concentrated too much brilliance in one place. It whispered that knowledge, like wealth, must be stored in many sanctuaries or be lost in a single flame. It glided across Edo's quiet snow, where Kiyomasa, the samurai treasurer, discovered that strength lies not in pride, but in the architecture behind it. Invisible foundations, multiple channels, prepared far before danger arrives. Then it reached the Sahara, where Idris hid his reserves beneath dunes, understanding what the desert teaches every wandering soul. The difference between survival and death lies in what no eye sees. And finally, it wound through Basel's winter streets, where clockmakers revealed the secret language of time itself. Everything that appears strong can break if it rests upon a single, fragile pivot. Everything that endures is built upon layers of unseen supports. Now the river tasted the orchards of Samarkand, where Rashid taught the last necessary truth. Prosperity is not urgent. It is patient. It is not loud. It is quiet. It is not the storm. It is the horizon. And as all these waters flowed together, each a story, each a mirror, each a warning, the river became a reflection of the listener. Because every person walking through life creates their own channels, their own deserts, their own orchards, their own libraries. Every person faces storms. Every person must choose what to build, what to protect, what to hide, and what to grow. The fire crackled softly. The voice lowered. "My friend," it said with the softness of a sage leaning forward by the glow of embers. "You have seen what history reveals only to those who listen closely. The world does not reward the brilliant alone. It rewards the prepared. It does not honor the strongest. It honors the most adaptive. It does not give peace to those who rush. It gives peace to those who build slowly, deliberately, across many seasons." A breath of silence. You now carry the Solomon Code within you, not as a myth, but as a compass. The compass pointed not toward a secret place, but toward a way of living. Build many channels, not one. Guard what others overlook. Invest in time, not urgency. Diversify your roots before the storm. Hide strength where danger cannot reach. And above all, plan for the decades no one else sees. Beyond the fire, night settled deeper, calm and endless. But in that darkness lived possibility, wide, patient, and generous to those who honored its shape. And as the final embers glowed softly, the narrator offered one last reminder, gentle, steady, and truthful. The river that remembers all its tributaries never runs dry. A pause. A final warmth in the voice. Koi, if this journey has stirred something within you, if these ancient stories have awakened clarity, consider supporting this work. Like the orchards of Samarkand, this channel grows through time, through shared intention, through those who walk long paths rather than short ones. A soft invitation. Like, subscribe, or share a small offering to keep this fire burning. You are now part of the echoes of wealth. The fire dimmed, the river flowed on, and the wisdom lingered, quiet and enduring, inside the listener's chest. Before we begin, make yourself comfortable. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breath fall into a gentle rhythm. There is nothing you must do now, nothing to solve, nothing to chase. This moment is simply a doorway, a quiet threshold, where the noise of the day dissolves and the deeper wisdom of your mind begins to rise. Close your eyes if you haven't already, and imagine a warm evening, a small fire burning low, its flames moving like slow gold in the darkness. You are seated beside it, calm, supported, unhurried, as the world around you grows softer with each breath. Inhale slowly and feel the chest expand like the opening of a gentle gate. Exhale slowly and feel the body release everything heavy, everything unnecessary. With every breath, you drift a little deeper, a little quieter, a little more peaceful. Now, imagine the fire's glow reflecting on a river before you. The surface is smooth, unbroken, a sheet of silver flowing through the night. This river is your mind, calm, steady, spacious. Every story you've heard tonight has settled into its waters like warm drops of gold. On the next slow inhale, feel the river widen. On the exhale, feel your body sinking gently into comfort. There is no urgency here, no deadlines, no noise, just rhythm and breath, and the deep sense that you are safe. You have walked through ancient ports, through burning libraries, through desert storms, through orchards with fruit that took decades to ripen, and all of it has brought you here, to this quiet moment of rest. Let the mind float. Let the body grow heavy. Let your breath become the soft tide that carries you deeper into serenity. In this stillness, a gentle truth begins to whisper within you. You are not meant to rush. You are meant to grow. You are not meant to chase the world's pace. You are meant to move with your own. You are not meant to survive on a single stream. You are meant to open many channels, many strengths, many forms of abundance. Inhale, long and soft, as if drawing in warm light. Exhale, slow and easy, as if releasing everything that does not serve you. The deeper you breathe, the deeper you rest. And the deeper you rest, the more your mind opens to the quiet architecture of wisdom already within you. You are entering a place where the world slows, where time becomes gentle, and where your thoughts drift like leaves on the river's surface. Let yourself float there. Let yourself surrender. You are safe. You are calm. You are exactly where you need to be. Good. Stay with the rhythm of your breath. Slow, warm, steady, like a lantern glowing behind your ribs. As your breath softens, your mind opens just a little more, like a window unlatched to the night wind. In this gentle openness, you can invite truths that nourish you, strengthen you, and clarify your path. Imagine now that the river beside you widens. its surface smooth as polished glass. The moon reflects across it in a long, shimmering line, a silver thread stretching far into the horizon. This thread is your future. Not a rushed future, not a chaotic future, but one shaped by patience, structure, and quiet mastery. Now, slowly repeat inside your mind, not loudly, but like soft ripples beneath the breath. I grow through many channels. Let the sentence sink into you, like water seeping into fertile soil. Again, I grow through many channels. Feel how your chest loosens when you no longer demand your life to rise from a single source. Feel how your breath deepens when you release the burden of relying on one income, one path, one opportunity, one identity. You are more than one stream. You are a delta, wide, expansive, resilient. Now breathe slowly and silently repeat. I do not depend on one. I build many. Every time you inhale, you create space for possibility. Every time you exhale, you let go of pressure and scarcity. Let the words settle into the quiet places of your mind. Let them become the quiet architecture beneath your thoughts. Imagine now that the river reveals small tributaries, thin silver paths branching outward into the darkness. Each tributary is a future channel of abundance, a new skill, a new partnership, a new form of income, a new opportunity you have not yet imagined. You do not need to define them now. Just know they exist. Know they are forming, quietly, beneath the surface of your life. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not lacking. You are expanding. Soft inhale, soft exhale. Now let another truth rise gently. I build slowly, and therefore I endure. Say it inside your chest. Feel how it steadies you. Rushed wealth collapses. Steady wealth compounds. You have seen this in every story tonight. Solomon's ports, Venice's networks, Timbuktu's hidden reserves, Samarkand's orchards. You carry that wisdom now. Another breath. The air entering smoothly, the body softening deeper into rest. Time is not a force against you. It is a companion, a partner, a quiet ally. You do not need to rush toward the future. You only need to walk toward it consistently. And as you breathe, your mind begins to trust this. You are building a long horizon, a deep foundation, a delta that survives all seasons. Let this truth settle warmly inside you as you drift deeper into stillness. Let your breath become even slower now, a soft tide rising and falling inside the quiet harbor of your body. With every inhale, you draw warmth into your chest. With every exhale, you release tension like sand falling gently from open hands. You are drifting deeper, but you remain aware, calm, steady, peaceful, as if resting in the arms of a desert night beneath an infinite sky. Now imagine yourself standing beside the river again. The fire behind you glows faintly, its warmth settling along your back. The moon reflects across the water like a path of light laid out just for you. But tonight, the river offers you something new. As you step closer, you notice the water growing clearer. You can see beneath the surface now, into depths you've never explored. And there, far below, lies a reservoir, silent, ancient, endless. It is your inner reserve, the strength that only appears when you stop rushing and allow yourself to see how much power has been quietly waiting beneath the surface of your life. Take a slow breath in and imagine drawing energy from that reservoir as if the water rises inside your chest. This is the you that endures, the you that survives storms, the you that does not collapse when one channel dries because many channels remain. This reservoir contains your skills, your courage, your patience, your intelligence, your experiences, your creativity, your intuition, your capacity to adapt, your ability to grow new roots whenever the old soil becomes barren. It is your hidden store of strength, the desert cache no one sees, the grain beneath Solomon's palace, the quiet gold beneath Venice's ledgers, the water hidden beneath Idris's dunes. Let that truth settle inside you. You are never limited to what is visible. You are never confined to the resources others can measure or judge. You are deeper than your current circumstances. You are broader than your current path. You are stronger than any single stream. On your next inhale, draw this truth into your lungs. On your next exhale, let go of the belief that you must live from surface-level strength alone. Feel how your stomach softens, your shoulders sink, your jaw loosens as your mind accepts this deeper foundation. Now repeat softly within yourself, like an echo moving through water. I have reserves. I have depth. I have more than the world sees. Again, slower. I have reserves. I have depth. I have more than the world sees. You do not need to prove anything. You do not need to rush forward. You only need to remember that you are built with layers of strength, some visible, some hidden, all real. And as you breathe, sense that reservoir expanding, quietly nourishing every part of your life, giving you the calm of a person who knows they cannot be broken by the loss of one stream. You are a delta. You are a reservoir. You are a structure built for seasons. Rest in that truth as the night deepens around you. Settle deeper. Let your breath fall into a rhythm so gentle it almost feels like silence. Your body grows heavier now, as if gravity is holding you with soft, steady hands. Imagine the river dissolves into mist, and as the mist parts, you find yourself standing at the base of ancient mountains. Their silhouettes rise into the night sky, vast, unmoving, older than memory itself. The air is cool here, still, sacred. These mountains have witnessed thousands of storms. They have endured centuries of winds, ages of erosion, cycles of drought and flood, and yet they remain strong, quiet, patient. As you breathe slowly, Feel their presence around you, a presence that reminds you of something essential. True strength is not loud. It is not frantic. It is not desperate. True strength is slow, deliberate, grounded. You place your palm gently against the surface of one mountain. It feels ancient, cool, almost alive with memory. As you breathe, imagine the mountain breathing with you, its mass rising faintly on your inhale, settling slightly on your exhale. You begin to sense what the mountain teaches. The mountain is not strong because it resists change. It is strong because it endures change patiently, steadily, without fear. Let this truth drift into your chest. I do not need to rush to be strong. Again, slower. Strength grows slowly. I grow slowly. And that is enough. Your heartbeat matches the mountain's rhythm now. A deep, calm, steady pulse. You feel the truth settling deeper. Every story you've heard tonight, Solomon building ports across decades, Rashid planting orchards for the future, Venetians mapping unseen currents, Timbuktu's caravans storing hidden reserves, all of them understood what the mountains understand. Time is not something to chase. It is something to partner with. Another breath. Soft. Grounded. As you continue breathing, you begin to sense a subtle shift inside your mind. A settling. A quiet anchoring. Your ambitions no longer feel frantic. They feel spacious, firm, rooted. You no longer see wealth as something that must arrive quickly. You see it as something that grows like these mountains, grain by grain, layer by layer, season by season. This awareness makes your body sink even deeper into calm. Now let the mountain whisper within you. What is built slowly cannot be easily broken. Again, let it echo. What is built slowly cannot be easily broken. Breathe that truth into your belly. Exhale the pressure you once carried. You are no longer a person rushing through life. You are a mountain rising from it. You are the patience that outlasts every storm. Feel that truth wrap around you like a warm cloak of calm, and rest in it. Let your breath remain soft as the mist drifting across the foothills. Your body is fully supported now, its weight sinking into a cradle of quiet comfort. You are safe. You are held. You are drifting deeper. As the mountains fade gently into the night, a new landscape forms around you, a hidden garden, sealed from the noise of the world. The soil here is dark and fertile, rich with forgotten seasons. Vines climb ancient stone walls. Lanterns glow like small stars, caught in branches heavy with leaves. This garden grows in silence. It flourishes not from force, not from urgency, but from calm continuity. It grows the way real wealth grows. Quietly, patiently, root first, fruit later. You step into the garden, and the air embraces you with warm stillness. You feel as if you have entered the inner room of your own mind, the place where your deepest strengths and truest potential have always been waiting. Look around you. Each plant, Each tree, each bloom is something you have grown within yourself. A tree of resilience stands near the entrance, broad, steady, its roots deep with experience from every hardship you survived. A vine of creativity curls along the wall, its leaves catching the lantern light, a reminder that your mind can always find new paths, new ideas, new solutions. A cluster of smaller plants grows near a fountain, each one a skill you've learned, a lesson you've lived, a small strength you may have forgotten, but which continues to grow quietly in the background of your life. In the center of the garden stands a single tree whose trunk glows faintly, as if lit from within. This is the tree of your long horizon, the tree that does not rush, the tree that holds every future version of you like seeds waiting for their time. Walk closer to it. Run your fingertips lightly along its bark. Feel the pulse of steady growth, a rhythm deeper than ambition, deeper than fear, deeper than the noise of the world. This tree is your patience made real, your discipline given form, your future growing even when you do nothing but breathe. And in the quiet of this moment, the tree begins to whisper its truth. You do not need everything today. You only need to grow a little each day. Again, slower. Small growth becomes great growth. Small steps become long journeys. Small roots become strong trees. Feel that truth settle into the softest parts of your mind. You have never needed to rush. You have only needed to continue. Every night you rest, your roots grow deeper. Every day you learn, your branches spread wider. Every season you endure, your fruit becomes sweeter. Now breathe, slow and long, and imagine the garden expanding with each inhale. Your long horizon unfolds gently, beautifully, without urgency. You are becoming the person you were meant to be, not through force, but through continuous quiet growth. Stay here a moment longer. Let the garden nourish you. Let the silence strengthen you. Let yourself grow.